Oh, that was perfect. An NPC came walking by just as I'm taking the picture. He's just like staring at me with my thumbs up, standing in front of nuked out foundation. This is so dumb. Oh my god. Just everybody in their fucking hazmat suits here.
Boy, it's that easy. Esbern, I didn't know you were musically inclined. Is that what you did in the rat way? Just pass your time? Come on, Esbern, we don't have time for this.
Oh, my mistake. Of course.
That's such a Delphine thing to say.
Delphine and Esbern, taking on Bethesda's wild vision of a post-apocalyptic West Virginia. When Patrician TV asked if I'd be interested in doing a co-op playthrough of Fallout 76, this premise was way too good to pass up on. So, over the course of 21 play sessions totaling over 150 hours, we endeavored to play through all the major content of the game from the original main quest all the way up to the most recent content update with the Pitt expeditions. What we found was a game that's struggling with an identity crisis. A live service game where its post-launch content continues a downward trend into painful mediocrity that even its die-hard fans can't be bothered with. A multiplayer game that barely encourages even playing on public servers, let alone teaming up with other players. A survival crafting game where the survival elements are trivialized after the first hour, and the only real barriers to consider with crafting are randomized schematics. A role-playing game with absolutely no permanence to player builds, and no need to serve specialized roles on a team because the game needs to be playable 100% solo. A base-building game with tons of items to fill those bases with, but they end up serving little purpose outside of being a convenience because, once again, the game doesn't want to force players to interact with the mechanic. And finally, a distinctly Bethesda game with tons of stories to tell, but the manner those stories are told in and the quality ranges from mildly interesting in premise to so bad the writing feels malicious and resentful towards the players themselves. Some of these issues were made much worse by updates that walked back whatever vision existed with the original game, though I suspect all of these issues still existed in those earlier versions. Ultimately, this is a game that, already afraid of committing to a core design so as not to alienate parts of the existing Fallout fanbase, was watered down even more because the backlash to the original product was so visceral. Compromises on top of compromises in chasing as wide an audience as possible has led to Fallout 76 being one of the most baffling experiences I've ever had with a multiplayer game. This was made all the more dissonant by the current impressions people on the outside have of it. There's a certain narrative surrounding 76 these days. It's the idea that the game is now good. That because Bethesda listened and added things like human NPCs and skill checks, the game has been redeemed on the levels of No Man's Sky. After seeing most of what 76 has to offer in a mostly chronological order of the content releases, I cannot disagree more with these claims. It came to a point that they just turned into a running joke between me and Pat.
What an amazing game they have here.
Guys,
like,
you don't understand. It's good now. They fixed it.
The greatest heist of all time was not the one that we're doing. It's the one that Bethesda did.
And it worked. The game is good now.
They haven't fixed it?
Why would they? They
When did this update come out?
They fixed the game. It's done. Wastelanders was a success. If you're at all familiar with Fallout 76, you're probably aware its launch was nothing short of a total disaster. I'm not going to dive into that because it's old news, and Bethesda has spent 4 years meticulously addressing most of the complaints people had with the game at launch. For better and for worse, 76 is a very different game from what it was when it initially released in late 2018. Our goal was not to open old issues or make fun of a Fallout game trying something new. We were both willing to meet the game on level ground and just evaluate if it's a good game now. I had my own motivation in that I was also looking for a new multiplayer game I could sink hours into during my off time. I really wanted 76 to hook me because, as far as I could tell, I should be in the crosshairs of this game's target demographic. I like Fallout games, even 3 and 4, and I was down for a more casual online experience. I was coming around to what 76 had been selling, an online survival crafting game that encourages co-op play with a smaller group, linking up with other players to tackle social events, and maybe making my own fun in the downtime between events. Building camps and farming junk didn't sound like the most exciting aspects to me, but I was willing to give it a try, especially if the social experience with the rest of the game could manage to excite me. Turns out, me asking the multiplayer game to play like a, multiplayer game was a bit of a big ask of Bethesda. Even after a 30-minute demo at E3 2018 with the legend himself, people were thoroughly confused about what 76 was even meant to be. It wasn't until the beta was out that most people even caught on that this was going to be something breaking the mold for a Fallout game. When I originally saw the game, I actually thought this was going to be a AAA version of Rust, where players were primarily meant to be building and crafting, and the real compelling aspects of gameplay would be the conflict that would arise between players, especially with the option of being able to drop nukes on each other. What I expected was some sort of focus on PvP, where emergent storytelling was the creative engine driving the players' entertainment. Not exactly the co-op Fallout 4 experience I assumed most players were referring to when they said they wanted a multiplayer Fallout, but I also don't have a company valued at $7.5 billion, so what do I know? No doubt, a major factor for why 76 was made to be a live service title came from ZeniMax lining up for a buyout, and it worked. Kinda. Disastrous launch aside, it's been slowly drawing people in over the years, especially after the Wastelanders update kicked off its PR redemption arc. The game has a lot of paying monthly subscribers now, and looking at other players as pay-picky palaces, people aren't shy about interacting with the in-game shop. I really can't help but wonder what if with my original impressions of 76. I know this wasn't Rust 2.0 after seeing footage from the beta, so it wasn't like I was going into this project with impressions that were going to lead to disillusionment. I really had no expectations at all because I still wasn't sure what 76 was, even after playing it for 30 hours back in 2021. So the first step of our journey was just figuring out what 76 was, and as it turns out, that's a very difficult question to answer. I'd argue there's at least 3 games in 76 anyone playing long enough will have to interact with at various points during their adventure. Its early, mid, and end games are all so distinct with such clear dividing lines that that's how I'm going to be structuring this video. I know I just threw a ton of incendiary takes at you, but believe me when I say I wanted to like this game. I can see the appeal it has to its most committed fans. It's a rather unique looter shooter with some genuinely great flexibility for character builds. It's got a captivating map that can be very atmospheric at times, which makes exploring it enjoyable for its own sake. Some of the most fun I had that wasn't owed to me just playing with a friend was doing social events like killing global bosses and mowing down waves of ghouls and super mutants in crazy events that could actually pose a challenge. I can see the appeal to players who just want to collect unique gear and have a social at a distance experience you might get from, say, going to a concert by yourself. None of that were really things I was interested in though. The realization of that, and coming to discover what 76 was truly about, still led to one of the most memorable and funny experiences I've ever had in a multiplayer game. Patrician is doing his own video where he focuses on the quests, storytelling, and narratives because that's what caught his attention the most. I, on the other hand, pretty much checked out of the story immediately and really started caring about the events of our own adventures and our progression into true battle-hardened Fallout 76 players. So I'm going to be focusing on the nitty-gritty technical topics. Loot, servers, mechanics, metas, leveling, events, grinds, and just what it's like trying to play this game like it's an MMO. If you were hoping to get a 6-hour Fallout 76 video, then you're actually in luck. If you want the game covered in as close to full detail as we can manage, you should watch both of our videos. And with all that said, I think it's time to begin. Before we could begin though, I had to get the game running well, and turns out that's easier said than done. To the game's credit, it did launch on my PC right out of the gate. That's more than I can say about Fallout 3, but the frame rate was hovering around 50 at the best of times and would dip into the 30s in more complex scenes. All jokes aside, I knew the creation engine was better optimized than this, and also I'd been playing Fallout 4 earlier that night, and that game was also performing the same. I'd played both of those games a year prior on the same PC and had no issues like this, so I guess newer graphics drivers were screwing with something. I never really figured out the root cause, I just found a way to fix the symptoms and moved on with my life. After some searching, I came across people reporting similar issues, and the solution was disabling VSync. I usually prefer leaving VSync on because I don't like having my graphics card working at 100% all the time, but whatever. I'll just go into the game's settings and, oh, there's no VSync option. Well, that's alright, I guess. I'm definitely no stranger to editing INI files, especially for a Bethesda game. Seems weird I have to do that for a multiplayer game that's still being actively supported by a dedicated team, and this is a known issue with a simple fix, but okay. So I disabled it, got in the game, and sweet. Problem solved. I even went into Fallout 4 and did the same thing and got that game running much better too. But 76 was still chugging a bit with some pretty hard frame rate drops, so back to Google and people were suggesting tweaking certain graphics options like God rays. I remember that being an issue with Fallout 4, and this introduces a recurring theme with 76. If it was a problem in 4 that was never fixed, yeah, you can bet 76 never fixed it either. So, okay, disable God rays. Got it. Just gonna go into the settings and yeah, it's not there. Back to Google, and it turns out the preset graphics options also change settings that aren't listed, like God rays. You could go into the INI again and manually edit all sorts of settings that are hidden in the game's UI, or you can just bump the preset down to medium or low and then go through all the other settings and tweak them back up to whatever you like. So I set the game to medium and then cranked all the other settings up, and it worked. A higher and more stable frame rate at the expense of some volumetric lighting. I also kept render distances down to medium because those are known to be high impact settings too. There was still some really annoying micro stuttering, but that had an easy fix that came a few weeks later, upgrading to an RTX 4080. So on a PC with a Ryzen 9 3900X, an RTX 4080, 32 gigs of RAM, and installing the game on a PCIe 4.0 NVMe SSD, I can manage about 100 FPS on average and load times around 20 to 30 seconds. Those can be improved modest amounts by playing on a private server. To put things into perspective, this game runs about as well as Red Dead Redemption 2 does, at max settings. So yeah, Fallout 76 is a really poorly optimized game on PC. I don't really know how well it plays on consoles, but I've heard the load times can be pretty brutal. Aside from the micro stuttering and less than ideal performance that I had to endure for most of my time with 76, there was also the fact that without VSync, my system was always cranking. I don't really care to have 3000 FPS in menus, but I couldn't limit the frame rate in my graphics card control panel because that would induce insane amounts of screen tearing. So I just had to endure my room turning into an oven whenever I played 76. Those issues aside, the game also just felt very cumbersome because my inputs almost always had a slight delay to them. Playing on private servers once again mitigated this issue, but on public servers, doing things like looting, interacting with vendors, talking to NPCs, inventory management, just moving and shooting, all of these were at the mercy of the server's temperament. More than once, Patricia and I server hopped or just went into our own private server just so that we could have a somewhat okay experience. The input lag was still there, it's just not as bad. After a point, we just loaded up private servers by default because functional hit registration was much more important than seeing the occasional rando acting as set dressing to remind us that this was meant to be a large-scale multiplayer game. Then there was a bug that started dogging me when we got into the DLC, reaching its peak during the Brotherhood of Steel expansions. One of my directional inputs just doesn't work. Why is this how is this a bug? Like, I'm holding backwards right now. It took a good 5 seconds for my character to start walking backwards.
Oh, you know.
What is this? What is this? I think
There's a lot of things going on in the server right now, okay?
It only affects first person. If I go third person, I can move around freely. So I had a section written up about this bug, but I decided to do some more investigating, and in the process, I even solved my uncapped frame rate issue. So first, this input lag bug is caused by having too high of a frame rate. The reason I was getting it in interiors like the farmhouse was because my frame rate was shooting up into the 300 range. My guess for why DLC interiors were worse than vanilla ones is that the environmental artists just got better at making more optimized interiors that ran better. So there's one compliment I can mine out of this saga. But this presented a new issue. If my uncapped frame rate was leading to this bug, which did affect interiors with combat, so yeah, pretty big issue, how can I cap my frame rate? Turns out, Fallout 76 had Gsync disabled from an update, and Bethesda never bothered to fix that. If you're unaware, Gsync is kind of an alternative to VSync, but you need a graphics card and a monitor that supports it. Fortunately, I have both, so that meant I was probably in luck. First, I had to verify that Gsync wasn't enabled. It wasn't. Then I had to go download a third-party utility to re-enable it and NVIDIA's VSync. With that, I finally had a capped frame rate, and that input lag bug was put to rest. Shame I only figured that out after I stopped playing, but at least I can sleep again. I'll link the Reddit posts that walked me through the process down below, just in case some of you are having similar issues. It almost feels petty complaining about these performance issues when looking at what players were dealing with when the game launched. I'm sure many of those players would have loved to swap places with me in 2022. The problem is that the game still feels like it's at best a beta and at worst a fan-made mod for Fallout 4. I cannot go through every bug I experienced. I cannot even go through every bug that caused me to voluntarily or involuntarily quit a server or the game. We'd unironically be here another hour. So I'll be sprinkling in the juiciest ones as we go along. Some of them were just puzzling. 76 is really janky, quite unstable, and just a generally unpleasant experience when it comes to polish. You either get used to the jank and the madness, or you quit the game entirely. There's no fan-made patches since it's an online game, so even the tired adage of modders will fix it doesn't work in this case. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm happy to see Bethesda in a position where they are being forced to actually address bugs in this game, but considering there are some famous bugs that are still in the game since its launch, I have my doubts that this game will ever feel polished enough to even compare to the likes of Skyrim.
Oh, what happened to my camera?
Whoa, what the fuck? What happened to you? What?
What do you see?
You look like a weird Slenderman monster now.
Wait, that glitch is still in the fucking game?
This is a thing?
That glitch was in fucking Joseph Anderson's video.
Yeah, what the fuck? Oh, that's horrifying.
What's horrifying about this? Let's get a picture together.
I got the pictures. Oh my god. You look like a fucking, like something out of a Lady Gaga music video.
What? Is there something
animation.
Is there something wrong with this?
Yes. No, don't get in.
It's yours now.
Yeah. Wait, actually. Hello? Hello? I live in this now. I've become
we
one.
don't have time for this.
I've become one with the environmental art. Don't worry, it'll catch up eventually.
Esbern, you have the mainframe cores in your inventory.
Eventually. Oh yeah, the best part is like my entire thing's locked up. Okay, this one's lasting a while. Okay, I can bring up the
I think it's because you're in that corner.
Oh wait.
I see your character moving now. That wasn't happening before.
I heard the sound. Oh wait. Oh, where'd it go? What?
Crouched.
Yeah, I accidentally alt-tabbed. My interface is gone. Am I still in the suit?
Yeah.
Not on my screen.
Try getting in yours.
It won't let me.
Because you're in the suit. I like that there's a power armor set in the corner that is a total trap.
Will my interface be back? God damn. No, my interface is still missing.
Listen, you've just unlocked photo mode, okay?
I can't even open the main menu. Like the escape menu. Literally the only thing that lets me open up is the friends list.
The map? Oh.
Funny thing is that a few weeks later, I saw someone complaining about the same exact set of power armor. The missile silo events in general are plagued with some serious next-level server-dependent jank, so I guess now's a good time to talk about the servers in 76. Public servers have a max capacity of 24 players, but there's 8 extra slots reserved for friends of people on the server. This is to hopefully allow for a seamless drop-in experience for people trying to team up with their friends. Speaking from experience, you can still get a server is full message when joining a friend and will have to wait in queue. Most of the time though, server population won't be an issue because most servers are rarely even at half their capacity. This is a game that has no qualms with server hopping and arguably even encourages it if you're doing things like farming materials and enemies. I still have no solid evidence for how things like loot syncs with the player in the servers. What I got are best guesses based on experimentation. Considering most people still don't know how player slots work on servers, I naturally haven't been able to find any reliable info online. Best I can tell, loot in the world is generated when someone moves through a cell. If that player looted that cell on another server earlier that day, no loot will be spawned. If you haven't looted the cell, the loot will spawn. This means even if you looted a location, you can server hop until you find a server where the loot is back because someone ran by and generated the items. Just remember, this will only apply to the overworld. Interior locations are instanced to whoever's the party leader. So if you cleared out Fort Defiance for all its military ammo bags, you'll have to wait 24 hours before you can run through it again. I mean, I think it's 24 hours. We'll get back to that. This is only relevant for loot that spawns in the world, though. Containers are a completely different story. Container loot, and loot that spawns on bodies, is generated for each player when they open the container. This can be seen on slower servers where you'll look in a container and it will briefly be empty before it spawns its contents, or if you have a perk that increases the loot inside specific containers. This means you won't be fighting for loot if you're playing with friends, which was actually a post-launch change. This does not apply to the junk items spawning in the world though, so someone's going to be getting screwed out of those military ammo bags. But at least you won't be fighting over all those 3-star legendary weapons during public events. There's also plants and ore veins, but those are instanced, so everyone can harvest them. It just means you cannot server hop to loot them more than once a day. So, world loot, containers, and resource nodes. All of them are dictated by different rules, and if you want to be looting efficiently, you really should get acquainted with how they all work. Are you confused yet? Good, you should be, because now we gotta talk about private servers. If you subscribe to Fallout First for $12.99 a month, you get access to private servers. It's exactly what you'd expect. A dedicated server for you and up to 8 of your friends to play on. These can be hopped as well if everyone leaves the server, a useful feature if you're farming enemies and want to keep respawning them in a certain location. I used this to get a bunch of handmade rifles one night so that I could break them down and get their upgrade schematics. I don't know for sure how long it takes for enemies to naturally respawn on a server, but my gut says 24 hours. Don't get any funny ideas about server hopping private worlds to respawn world loot though, because like I said earlier, loot gen is tied to individual players loading the world cells, irrespective of it being private or public. As I also mentioned earlier, private servers come with the added benefit of being much more stable. Hit registration is better, input lag is reduced, FPS is smoother, enemy AI seems more intelligent, and you'll just get far fewer instances of the server booting you to the main menu, though it still happens. But there's some other screwy things public servers do that you won't see private ones doing as often or at all. Mostly it comes down to the way servers have to balance their load. There seems to be a lot of levers servers are able to pull in the background to keep the servers from blowing up when there's 24 plus 8 players running around spawning tons of enemies and items all over the map. You can see the levers in action in public events like Radiation Rumble, where the game wants to spawn a ton of enemies. If the server population is really low, the server will have more headroom to spawn more enemies because there's fewer people on the map loading cells. You can also see the game spawning lots of enemies if the server population is high, but most of the players are at the event. Because the server is able to deload unpopulated cells, it can crank the spawn rates. It's where you get a high server population but low player attendance situation that things get interesting. And by interesting, I mean really boring because the server can't spawn much. You're unlikely to see this in an event like Radiation Rumble because everyone and their mother rushes to do this event for its insane payout, but if you're doing something like a missile silo with your buddy, oh yeah, you're gonna see the server throttling your event. This also means you will almost never see multiple events going on simultaneously unless one has been triggered by a player. The servers, they really can't handle too much going on at once. I just want to point out how funny it is that the consideration for spawns at events has little to do with actually balancing the events and making it fun for players, but instead it's just a way to ease server load. Anyways, let's circle back to me and Pat running missile silos. The first time we did a silo, we did it on a private server, and the game held nothing back as it sent endless waves of assaultrons and gutsies as half a dozen turrets fired on us at any given time. In fact, the game was spawning so many turrets that Pat crashed the server hacking a terminal that was linked to something like 14 turrets. Twice. But when we were doing those silos a couple nights later on a public server, yeah, not nearly as thrilling. One server didn't spawn any turrets in the final room, and most of our time was spent just waiting for the progress bar to fill because the game was spawning a handful of enemies every minute. If you want to cruise through these silos, or any event that relies on spawning lots of enemies, then yeah, your best bet is to jump into a busy lobby. If you want to actually have a fun and challenging experience like we were, then you're going to have to find a dead lobby or pay up for a private server. There's no server browser or even any way of telling the game you want to join a quiet or a busy server. There's no way of even really knowing how full a server is. There's no menu that lists every player currently in a server, and not every player is going to be displayed on the map. There's a recent players tab in the social menu, but that's just any player you've come in contact with regardless of whether they're still on the server or not. The best advice I can give is checking to see how many nukes have been dropped on the map. If you see 3 nuked zones, the server is likely dead. You can also check to see how many public teams exist and how full they are. That can sometimes be a good indicator too. You can also end up on a server with a bunch of low-level players who won't be doing the events you want to do, so they'll just be throttling your events. Or you can end up on a server with a bunch of high-level players killing tons of enemies and lagging the server to hell. If there was ever a game I've played that could use a dedicated server filtering system, 76 is it. The matchmaking system at least seems to prioritize servers that will let your camp be spawned where you last placed it, but that goes out the window if you're joining a server your friend is on. Speaking of friends, it's time Pat and I finally met up. But just one more topic. Fallout 76 starts with the time-honored tradition of a Fallout game starting in a vault. Well, except for that one that started with the player getting shot in the head out in the desert. The game's even got one of those iconic opening video sequences with some in-game cutscenes. They really wanted to sell the idea as early as possible that this was still a Fallout game despite it being completely online. It's all to set up the premise of the game. Every player is a vault dweller from the titular Vault 76. The vault was designed to house the best and brightest America had to offer at the time. 25 years later, on October 23rd, 2102, dubbed Reclamation Day, the vault would open and everyone inside would be free to rebuild Appalachia. In essence, this is the first vault we've seen in a Bethesda Fallout game actually serving its advertised purpose. Bethesda really latched on to the concept that some of these vaults were actually social experiments being run by Vault-Tec. Bethesda has enjoyed using this premise to turn them into themed dungeons that often explore the wackier side of the setting, resulting in almost every one of them utterly failing after a point. Whether you love them or hate them, there's no denying the proportion of experimental vaults to legitimate vaults like 76 really calls into question how Vault-Tec is presented in Bethesda titles. And with how the main story of Fallout 76 goes, Vault 76 could also be seen as yet another experimental vault. Vault 76 is really just meant to explain how you have so many protagonist players running around West Virginia doing things the previous inhabitants couldn't. The problems begin once you start to actually think about what's being presented here, though. If you look at your Pip-Boy, you'll see time progresses. In fact, if you start the game right now, 2 years have progressed since Reclamation Day. The start date of the game jumped ahead 1 year after the Wastelanders update, and another year passed with the start of the Steel Rain update. This is meant to help explain why West Virginia suddenly has settlers again, why the Brotherhood of Steel are back, and why some players are quad-digit level demigods with mansions overlooking the Overseer's house. Okay, so how does the game rationalize the idea that not all people playing 76 have been there since the game launched, and are therefore showing up 2 years late to Reclamation Day? Simple. They just say the player overslept. Don't you just hate sleeping through 2 years of alarm clocks because you partied so hard? Well, that's the implication they went with the moment you finish character creation and hear the Overseer's automated message over the PA. You could write the headcanon that your character just didn't want to leave the vault and decide to stay down there listening to the Overseer's message on repeat for 2 years, but I don't think that really tracks. Especially since originally the vault was designed to shut itself down 48 hours after Reclamation Day. I don't know, maybe they just heard how awful it is out there with the Scorched Plague, raiders, rampant robots, super mutants, and other 76 dwellers dropping nukes constantly. But if that's the case, why didn't anyone else return to the vault? We can open the door so it's not like a handful of people staying in the vault could maintain the place and just act as doormen. I really liked Pat's suggestion that Vault 76 ought to have been a hub area for the players and that we were expected to return to it from time to time. I mean, we can return to its front door, fast traveling to it's even free, but once we leave, it's sealed forever. Instead, we get the developers coming up with some silly hand wave to explain why they're sealing off a section of the map that doesn't need to be sealed off. I just find it odd that nobody thought this introduction would make no sense in a few years after the game launched, especially if they start pushing the calendar ahead a couple years. You'd think keeping the introduction sensible would be a priority for a game that is meant to be in service for, a few years. It's entirely possible they had different ideas for post-launch content that this intro would be congruent with, but when people reacted so poorly to the original vision of the game, they had to abandon those ideas and make do with what they got. So they wrote a quippy little hand wave and called it a day. It's stupid and a little bit condescending, but this won't be the last time something in the game feels like it was written maliciously to subtly dig at the players who hated the original game. I don't really know how this introduction could be saved in a post-Wastelanders Fallout 76. Frankly, I think making it so that new players are just people wandering back into West Virginia would work a lot better. Honestly, the game doesn't even do anything with the players being from 76 anyways, even in the main story. Even our Pitt boys barely have a role to play to explain why we can do things the former inhabitants couldn't. So what's the harm in saying the vault really did seal on Reclamation Day? If we really want to keep these 76 in Fallout 76, just say the players are LARPing as 76 dwellers by finding a suit and a Pip-Boy. We got an entire faction of people LARPing as first responders, so what's the harm in making the players do it too? Maybe the Overseer might be peeved that none of her vault dwellers picked up the main quest, but she's not exactly the type of person to be turning down free help. Okay, so now let's talk about the Overseer. In Vault 76, we are directed into the Overseer's office and told to pull a tape out of her computer. In it, she explains she's leaving the vault the day before Reclamation Day. So nobody in 2 years thought to investigate why their leader mysteriously vanished the night before, and she explains her mission given to her by Vault-Tec. She was tasked with going out and securing the 3 automated nuclear missile silos in Appalachia in the name of Vault-Tec. She assumes because we had the gumption to break into her office and pilfer her personal computer, we must be trustworthy enough to be told about this mission. She says she's also going to be scouting ahead and leaving behind whatever info and supplies she can, and that we should be on the lookout for that too. I actually like this premise. In fact, I think it's one of the strongest elements 76's story has going for it. It's very open-ended and lends itself towards what would naturally be a strong suit for Bethesda, getting players to explore the world, and that's exactly what Pat and I did once we teamed up outside the vault. There were still quest markers to lead us to the next stages of the main quest, but there wasn't a huge degree of urgency to it after the first couple of Overseer tapes. So free of Vault 76's magical teleportation and time dilation devices, Delphine and Esbern were finally able to meet up in Appalachia. Delphine? Is that you? Oh my god, what the fuck? When your character blinks, her eyelids are just bright red.
Yeah, she's got eyeshadow in Skyrim.
That's the eyeshadow. It makes dude, she looks like a fucking android malfunctioning when she blinks. Holy shit.
I foresaw this.
After running around the woods for 40 minutes, finding our bearings, and getting dressed up, we finally got on board with the game's opening tutorial section. The first leg was sending us over to the Wayward to find out how to build camps. Thing to note is that the game already had a tutorial section in Vault 76, which I found funny because why would our characters need these cardboard pop-up displays to explain things they should already be experts on after spending 25 plus 2 years in Vault 76 preparing for this day? Alright, I swear that's the last time I'm going to bring up the intro. The Wayward was an addition by the Wastelanders DLC update, and is the first major example of the DLC trying to jump in the way of the main story. A lot of post-launch content is very dismissive of the original main story and tries its best to either retcon it or at least distract the player from looking at it. So the holotape that was meant to be in the Overseer's cache across the street from the bar was moved into the inventory of one of the characters in the Wayward. This forces the player to interact with an altercation there that shoves a couple of entries related to its quests into the player's journal. These end up acting as constant reminders of what the player skipped out on just in case they did the unthinkable of sticking to the main quest. We screwed around with this diversion for a bit before deciding to just head back to the Overseer's camp tutorial. We wouldn't return to the Wayward for another 11 nights, just to give some idea as to how much content the devs are trying to head off here. After a very brief camp tutorial, it was over to the town of Flatwoods down the road to finish out the remainder of the tutorials. It was here we got our first brush with the Responders. This was a faction of first responders who, after the bombs fell, started acting as a charitable organization aiding survivors around Charleston and Morgantown. Fortunately for players pre-Wastelanders, the responders were big into utilizing the robots and computers that were left all over West Virginia to carry out things like recruitment, resupply operations, and combat with regional threats. Wastelanders added the LARPers I mentioned earlier, who started using these automated systems to join up and rebuild the faction. It's kinda weird running around doing their training programs and hearing about their noble but ultimately doomed quest to stop the Scorched Plague, only to see that, yeah, they're back now. Even if you avoid the main story, the new responders are pretty hard to miss. They have members all over the map, posters in resupply areas, they set up at train stations and gas stations all over the region, and they even have a constant radio transmission inviting people to the new headquarters of the White Springs Resort. We're going to put most of that stuff on the shelf until pretty much the end of the game because that's all stuff related to the Pitt expeditions, but we will be doing their automated survival tutorials. These had us signing up as volunteer responders, which came with some perks like somehow getting free supplies from their kiosks and, more importantly, getting player and scoreboard XP. So let's talk about mechanics. If you played Fallout 4, you're already about 60% of the way to understanding 76. It's no surprise that the game that was built off of a modified version of Fallout 4 would play a lot like it. There's been quite a bit of tweaks made to the systems, but for the most part, the basics of combat are pretty much the same. I'd say that's a good thing because, as a whole, I thought Fallout 4 was a competent shooter. That was perhaps to its own detriment because if you were even remotely good at shooters, Fallout 4 was a very easy game, but it still had pretty solid gunplay. Because the experience in 76 is entirely dependent upon whether the server is having a bad day or not, the game ends up feeling like a downgraded Fallout 4 experience in the game feel department. Even at the best of times, this feels like an MMO version of 4, which is funny because the combat is supposed to be real-time. Even VATS is now real-time. Speaking of, I'm the type of Fallout player who just completely ignores VATS, even in Fallout 3, but especially in Fallout 4. I remember at one point I didn't even have VATS bound to any key because I just never used it and didn't want to accidentally hit it. Come 76, and I tried to play it like Fallout 4 with middling success. Bad controls, enemy movement, and hit registration made adapting to Fallout 76's shooting more challenging than it needed to be. That really should have been my excuse to get on the VATS program early, but I'm stubborn like that sometimes. I would only use VATS to hunt down targets and drop enemies swarming me because with VATS now being real time, it's no joke just an aimbot now. Because stopping and slowing down time is obviously out of the question, VATS needed to change. So the solution they came up with was making VATS only require the player to hold down the trigger until their action points have been depleted. I actually really like this implementation of VATS because I always hated how in previous games VATS slowed down the pace of combat. VATS is not only quicker, it also requires more skill than just timing it correctly and picking a limited target. It's an aimbot, but at a price. The price wasn't just having to get good at using it, but also perks. Lots and lots of perks. Here's probably the biggest and best change Fallout 76 made to Fallout 4's systems. The old leveling system with the stupid perk chart has been completely replaced, and in its stead we got perk cards. The basis of this system is the typical special attribute system that's been in every Fallout game. It's still here, but what's changed is that the player starts at 1s across the board for all their special stats. The first 49 level ups awards a single attribute point the player gets to invest into one of these 7 special stats. My only problem with this system is the silliness that the game is saying our characters are the weakest, poor-sighted, thin-skinned, unlikable, dumbest, slowest, and unluckiest person around, despite apparently being one of pre-war America's best and brightest. Other than that, it's a unique spin on the old formula and definitely much better than just giving us a bunch of points to blindly spend when we can't even see the perk tree until after the game's tutorial. Each level up in a stat allows the player to equip another perk card in its slot. There's a few cards that break the rule, but usually 1 point allows for 1 card related to the stat. On top of picking a stat to invest in, each level increase allows you to select a perk card to unlock. For the first 49 level ups, you'll be limited to only cards related to the stat you increased. But after you stop getting points to put into your stats, you're free to just unlock any card in your deck. Level 50 is a magic number in 76's progression and is where I'd say the early game ends and the mid game begins. Hence why I said the dividing line between these 2 stages of the game has a very defined point. All the considerations for how you want to be leveling changes, but don't let that fool you into thinking your choices earlier mattered all that much because it turns out they really don't. At any point in time, you're able to swap equipped perk cards, and at level 25, you unlock the punch card machine, which lets you reallocate your special points for free. So you can completely change your character's build any way you want, whenever you want. The only restraint becomes the cards you have unlocked, and at level 50, you'll have access to the entire deck, meaning any build is only a few level ups out of reach. When Pat and I realized that character builds had virtually no permanence, we just gave up on our original plan of specializing our crafting rolls because it was completely pointless. Why bother only leveling perks for crafting armor when you can swap to a weapon crafting perk? Why only get charisma cards for team play when you can swap to mercantile cards before talking to a vendor? The punch card machine also has build loadout slots, so we ended up making a combat build and a home build, and we just swap between the two whether we were out in the field or back at camp. A lot of these convenience features were added post-launch, and honestly, I appreciate they exist because the alternative would have been making multiple characters, and with how RNG factors so heavily into player progression, building new characters to have a diverse set of skills would be painfully tedious. As well, multiplayer doesn't encourage a division of labor or specialized combat roles because the game is just too easy. A very common example of how easy the game is was whenever something like this would happen.
Oh, I'm probably in my home build. Fuck's sake.
Oh shit, did I leave my home build on too? Yep. On my home build. I was doing that.
Did you do the...
Yes.
Wow.
It was very hard to discern when we didn't have our combat perks equipped because the difficulty of Fallout 76 feels like it's put to Fallout 4's easy setting. Even by the end, when I needed a full set of agility and luck cards to pull off ridiculous strings of critical hits and VATs, I still wasn't always catching on that I was in my home build because the difference was maybe 5 more seconds to kill an enemy. This is not a game with a very low time to kill. In fact, I'd say most enemies in the game land in the bullet sponge side of things, especially enemies like super mutants. So a difference of 5 seconds isn't going to be noticeably felt in moment-to-moment combat. Half the time I was catching myself in the wrong build was when I noticed I was having to heal more often, as in at all, because I was missing my armor and health perks. Even if you're playing a low health and armor build, healing in 76 isn't really a big deal. The game makes sure to keep you stocked up on things like Stimpaks, Radaway, and Radex to the point that you're almost certainly going to be running at a surplus. Something you might see as a new player is a high-level player coming over to you and dumping a mountain of chems at your feet. Sure, it's a nice gesture. I always reserved my extra chems to sell to NPC vendors for caps, but just know that player likely accumulated their bounty of chems over the course of maybe 2 hours, just knocking out their daily obligations. The survival mechanics in this game are also virtually non-existent. Originally, they were much more punishing. Things like not eating or drinking would lead to stat debuffs until the player hit starvation status, and then their health would start dropping. This was entirely reversed in 2020, where now being well fed, hydrated, and rested gives stat buffs. These are pretty significant bonuses too, and some endurance perks enhance these effects even more. Different food and drink items offer all sorts of bonuses as well, encouraging players to consider what they are preparing when interacting with the surprisingly robust cooking system. I like this change because 76 already had a bunch of things you have to babysit. Super punishing survival mechanics aren't really going to jive well here. The problem, once again, is that the game is just too easy. Aside from bonuses to things like action points, carry weight, and player XP gain, there's not much to consider here. Using chems and sprinting around a lot will make the player thirsty, but it's still not much of a consideration. This is because it's absolutely trivial amassing a trove of food and drink. I really wish I didn't need to point out that in a post-apocalyptic setting, an abundance of food and drinkable water is a bit absurd. It's trivialized even more if you just build a modest farm in your camp, which is exactly what I did. I would go to the nearby river to harvest a full inventory of dirty water in a few seconds and then boil it all to make it usable. Then I'd mix in some blackberries I was growing on my farm, and I never had to consider thirst again, even though a part of my build was taking tons of chems. There's even perk cards to reduce the impact chems have on thirst or just slow down the decay of those needs, but I can't imagine anyone equipping them if they have anything else better to put in those endurance slots. Bethesda tried to balance out the food supply by making any player-crafted food and drink rot after a point, but you can grow food so quickly that you can easily outpace this decay rate. As well, just doing certain public events will load you up with tons of raw meat that would last you perhaps a whole week of play sessions if it didn't rot over time. There's also a disease and mutation system. While diseases are surprisingly quite benign, mutations are actually a bit of a clever idea. Diseases can be acquired from eating or drinking tainted items, sleeping in a sketchy location, or being attacked by a diseased creature. There's even a disease resistance stat that can be affected by hunger and chems. Ultimately, they aren't really that scary because their effects are pretty minimal and can be cured with some common disease cure items or just waited out for 15 minutes. Mutations are more interesting. They come with a bonus as well as a downside, like the Eagle Eyes mutation, which gives a bump to perception and critical damage at the cost of some strength. You have a chance of developing a random mutation if you're exposed to a decent amount of radiation, and taking Radaway has a chance to remove it. There's perks to reduce the negatives of mutations and perks to reduce the chance of losing them when taking Radaway. The game even has serums you can acquire if there's a specific mutation you want. This is a neat idea calling back to the traits in previous Fallout games, and a lot of them are actually quite powerful. Some experienced players will sometimes even do entire character builds that are built around a mutation. There's quite a bit more to the mechanics side of 76, but we really should make some quest progress here. Conventional wisdom for a story in a game like this these days is to structure the beginning parts of the story and slowly open things up so the player feels prepared to go out on their own. Fallout 76 ends up not abiding by that formula, and it's no doubt for the better. It actually does the inverse, where the latter parts of the story and its quests become way more structured, only dropping things back to something more freeform in the last chapter of the story. It's no coincidence then that the beginning and end of the main story were our favorite parts. But because the opening chapter of the story was so laissez-faire, it took us the longest to complete at something close to 6 days. No, there isn't that much content to the first chapter of the story, isn't even that much content to the main quest to drag it out for so long. We just naturally got sidetracked doing things that we wanted to do, like fully exploring the parts of the map the first chapter took place in. What's neat about the main story after Flatwoods is that it takes the player along a well-designed stretch of highway all the way up to Morgantown that honestly reminded me of the stretch of highway between Goodsprings and Nipton in Fallout New Vegas. Flatwoods was obviously Goodsprings with its tutorials and starting amenities, and 76's Nipton ends up being Morgantown, where the player is really put face-to-face with the full extent of the Scourged Plague, similar to how Nipton was used to introduce Caesar's Legion. So Pat and I were on our way to 76's Prim and Mojave outpost, which turned out to be Sutton and Helvetia. These places don't have a lot going on quest-wise though, because future updates never bother to come in and expand these places with anything. The only NPCs Pat and I came across were generated by random events. Yes, just like the ones from Skyrim, though somehow even more annoying here. And looking back, I'm actually kind of grateful this part of the map has been forgotten because it means it's free to be as true to the original 76 experience as anything in this game can really be in late 2022. While it would have been nice to get something on the level of Prim, 76 was doing something different here and surprisingly was actually working. We were still following the Overseer's breadcrumb trail of holotapes she was recording as she was getting her bearings in the region. It's a unique storytelling method the writers actually utilized well here. They managed to create a connection between the player and the Overseer through shared experiences, while she shares her origin story in appropriately measured doses. I could see some players rolling their eyes, wondering why they gotta listen to this woman's life story as they visit her childhood home, her high school, and the university where she became Overseer certified, but I enjoyed it. There's a certain haunting tension to this as we're listening to a woman who is essentially just talking to herself, hoping one day someone would stumble upon these recordings and find them useful. With everything we've been seeing up until this point, we can't help but wonder if she's even still alive out there. Or at least, that's how it used to play out. This is all deflated now thanks to the Wastelanders DLC. The Overseer never existed in the game until that DLC, so players would never get confirmation if the Overseer was still alive or not. Now we can just go to her Pay Piggy Palace outside of Sutton before finding more than 3 of her holotapes. If we enter the place, we'll just find her chilling on her couch watching films on her projector. If you try talking to her, odds are she's just gonna brush you off. This is because you gotta be level 20 in order to kick off the Wastelanders quest line.
Not good. Not good.
Oh, it should be fine. We've seen her alive.
Yeah.
Did you always meet her?
No.
Okay, so that also fucks with the story because it's like, oh, are we supposed to be speculating that maybe she's gonna die? Because that's kind of hard to do when we fucking met her.
Even if you manage to somehow miss the giant pristine house overlooking a major player resupply station in the area, just running into all the useless human NPCs in the region completely snuffs out the haunting atmosphere the quest and the Overseer's holotapes creates. Once again, I would have been fine losing this unique storytelling method if the added NPCs were being used to create things on the level of Prim and Novak, but they weren't. At best, you can pass arbitrary skill checks and get the random event NPCs to keep you company at your camp, but most of the people just wander around spouting off watered-down lore or generic lines about how hard it is being a settler or a capital R raider. Now don't let all the positive things I've said about this stretch fool you into thinking we were having a blast at this stage of the game. There was only so long we were able to appreciate a fleeting emotion the game kept trying to sabotage. After a point, we just fell back into the fairly mind-numbing repetition of shooting and looting everything we came in contact with. Playing co-op is honestly a bit of a double-edged sword. When combat and looting are 2 of the only things you're really going to be engaged with when doing open-world PvE content, having multiple people only makes it go faster, not better. Sure, we were having fun cracking jokes and settling into our roles as Delphine and Esbern, but the gameplay experience was already falling apart just coming in contact with 2 protagonist players, even at level 5. The game is completely incapable of scaling areas and encounters to match the advantage multiple players can have. have. So it wound up playing out that Pat would clear out enemies in an area and I'd go loot goblin mode and start 5-finger discounting anything of value. I really can't imagine what a full 4-player team could do to most areas and dungeons, but I'm picturing something resembling a biblical swarm of locusts right now. Morgantown is the first major city most players are likely to run into if they are following the main quest. It's a neat location with plenty to explore and dungeons to clear. If I was playing 76 like I'd play previous Fallout games, I probably would have spent about 10 hours just combing through the place. And this isn't even the largest city on the map. It has a lot of the verticality Bethesda introduced with downtown Boston in Fallout 4, but more sanely implemented and much better performance-wise. In fact, I liked Morgantown so much it ended up becoming my hometown a couple nights later when I finally set up my camp outside of its airport. Once again, it's a part of the map seemingly forgotten by post-launch content, and you're rarely going to see other players running through the place, so it felt like I had an entire city to myself. We ended up spending quite a while in Morgantown. First, just exploring its streets, then hitting up the university and its high school because the Overseer's log sent us to those places. And then to the airport where the responders had set up their HQ.
Oh god, what happened?
Ah! Lock tight. Oh no. Delphine? Are you trapped? There you go.
What the fuck? Ah, fuck.
Did you get stuck again?
Fuck's sake, Fallout. Holy shit.
This was probably the peak for the game's main story, and as such, the peak of its writing entirely. Even with the knowledge that the responders were back now, it was still hard to completely dismiss the feeling of exploring the desolate airport. The responders had been doing everything they could to combat the Scorched, but ultimately they were wiped out by their assaults and the viral infections. The Scorched Plague was a mysterious illness that would infect humans and local wildlife and convert them into something that was very similar to ghouls, except rather than just becoming feral monsters, they've become something of a hive mind. I mean, in-game, they are literally indistinguishable from feral ghouls, but lore-wise, there's meant to be a distinction. We also caught a glimpse of what had been spreading the virus. Giant mutated bats, I mean.
What the fuck? It's Parthenax!
What? Son of a bitch. Inside the airport, we got to the main operations center where the responders made their last stand. An overseer log here explains that the responders developed a vaccine to protect people from the plague, but it came too late to save Appalachia. She urges us to get vaxxed, and I mean, yeah, I don't want to turn into a literal pile of glowing ash, so sure, we'll look into this. You're supposed to then refer to a terminal out in the R&D medical lab to get the full details on the vaccine, and that would direct you to Charleston, all the way in the southwestern part of the map. I kinda missed that detail, but I had Pat, who is being very diligent with keeping up with the story, our objectives, and where we should be going. So I didn't actually learn about the vaccine, but the game was kind enough to let me keep pace with Pat and get it anyways. Remember this moment. It'll be coming back up later. Looking at the map, there's 3 roads leading out of Morgantown that will take the player to Charleston. 2 very roundabout scenic routes east and west of the area we just came through, or a center road that cuts straight down to it, also putting the player in contact with some stuff they likely haven't explored yet. We wound up taking the eastern route that cut through Summersville and skirted around a dried lake bed. Not much happened here except for us stumbling across our first super mutants. Yes, this is another Bethesda game with orcs somehow shoehorned in. We eventually made it to Charleston, but before we continue, we really gotta talk about this game's map. When Pat and I were first talking about this collaboration, we were also throwing around the idea of taking a trip to West Virginia just to see how 76 compared to the real thing. Now, I did not actually expect the trip to happen until I was in Cumberland, Maryland, meeting Pat at an Amtrak station. We chose Cumberland to start our tour for 2 reasons. First, it would allow us to cross the state line together so we could immediately start capturing footage for our videos. Second, the Amtrak designation for Cumberland was CUM. So yes, Pat and I met for the first time in Cumtown. We also spent 20 hours in a car together driving through desolate country roads and shared a hotel room for 2 nights. Degenerate fanfiction fuel aside, the trip completely invalidated almost everything I had written about 76's map before I had left. We even ended the trip in DC for a few reasons, and this allowed us to do a quick comparison between how Bethesda handled that city in Fallout 3 with how they handled West Virginia in 76. Needless to say, the longer the trip went on, the worse our impressions were about Bethesda's take on the Mountain State. People love to praise the map of 76, and with good reason. I still think functionally it's the best map Bethesda's ever produced. It's a real joy to explore, with several distinct biomes that cleanly blend into one another to make something that feels quite grounded for a video game map. At the same time, Bethesda still made the map fun with tons of points of interest, and the terrain wasn't painful to traverse. The map's supposed to be 4 times the size of Fallout 4's map, and Bethesda seems to have used this extra real estate to create more realistic mountain slopes and valleys. The highest point of the map is said to be 4,800 feet above sea level, same as its real-life counterpart, and I'm inclined to believe it. It's hard to judge scale in games, mostly because monitors deprive us of our sense of depth, but trusting the 3D modelers did a good job, we can use trees and other details to gauge what's going on with the game's scale. When looking at the new River Gorge Bridge overlooking Flatwoods, which isn't its actual place in the state, FYI. Yeah, it looks like it's 780 feet tall. The problem is that while I think they got some of the key elevations correct in the game, the horizontal scale and the characteristics of the terrain are not correct. In isolation, all of the inconsistencies wouldn't be deal breakers, but in combination with one another, they all add up to create a space that does not feel like West Virginia. Like, it's not even close. At least none of the locations we visited, and we drove for 800 miles in the state. The landscape of the entire state is very dramatic. If you're not standing on top of a mountain, then you're being hemmed in by wooded mountains in pretty much every direction. Anywhere you look, odds are there's a wall of trees, rocks, and earth towering over you. When we were standing at the bottom of the Glade Creek Ravine, staring up at a bridge 700 feet above us, surrounded on both sides by sheer walls of trees and land, I felt a sense of claustrophobia I had never felt before. When I was there, I kept thinking how difficult it would be to survive in that region without modern amenities or serious knowledge and skill. It all made sense how, even today, development in West Virginia is done where it's technically feasible. Only through feats of engineering and construction genius have parts of the state been made traversable. So much of it is still untamed wilderness, and the communities that do exist are often remote and secluded. If there's any open, flat, buildable space, like along the Kanawha River, it was developed generations ago. As a result, this is still a place that demands you adapt to it. The land changes people, even me, and I was only there for a couple days. Just driving on its insanely hilly and windy roads required me to get used to that sense of vertigo you get when you're in an elevator. I'd gotten so used to popping my ears from the pressure differences from the changes in elevations that I was still habitually trying to pop them when I got back home, even though we have literally no hills around here. One of the many thoughts that crossed my mind while I was there was that this was a perfect setting for a survival game. That makes it all the more sad that Bethesda just could not get it right. Things were too spread out to create that sense of claustrophobia, the trees were too sparse to create natural walls, the mountain faces were bald exposed cliff rock, which, yeah, you'd see that on the highways where they had to blast through the mountains to build the roadway, but that was almost never seen elsewhere in the state because these mountains are ancient and eroded. We went in the last week of winter, so the foliage was still in hibernation, but looking at summer pictures, you cannot see any exposed rock. It's all forest greenery. And then there's the many powerful rivers and lakes that have been carving through the region for tens to hundreds of millions of years, and 76 reduces them to little brooks you can literally jump across. They did nail that sense of awe when reaching the edge of a cliff and seeing a vast landscape sprawling out in front of you. Bethesda has been doing this for many games now, and I don't think they wasted the potential West Virginia offered them to flex that particular muscle. Pat and I ended up visiting just about every major settlement we recognized from the game that landed on our route. Our first day we started with Morgantown, then went south to Grafton, then west to Clarksburg. After that, it was south to Sutton, which turned out to have a really cool dam, then to Charleston, where we spent our first night. The next day, we drove around Charleston for a bit, then headed south through Beckley, then east through Lewisburg into White Sulphur Springs. Then it was north to the Green Bank Observatory, which in-game is just thrown on the side of a mountain, but in real life it's at the bottom of a massive valley. This is because the mountains and trees create a natural barrier against radio interference, which the telescopes need to be isolated from. I have a hard time believing someone at Bethesda actually visited this location, because the observation deck had only one plaque there and it explained all of this in plain English. If they'd have been there, I doubt they would have missed that information or the fact that cell service was cut for 2 hours. Anyways, after Green Bank, we continued north until we hit US 250, which took us southeast out of the state through very dramatic mountain ridges into the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia. From there, we went all the way back up into West Virginia to hit Harper's Ferry to close out the state, before turning down south to spend night 2 in DC. The second day was the most surprising because we were seeing landscapes that didn't even exist in 76. For several hours, we were driving through picturesque pastoral ranch land that sat at the bottom of a long valley between 2 mountain ridges that were covered in tall hardwoods. Nothing like this existed in-game, which was shocking because they decided to include a bunch of biomes that don't even exist in the state. In-game, we have 6 biomes. The forest is the starting place for new characters and is probably my favorite biome. It seems like this is meant to be the western side of the state, which, doesn't look like the region at all. While that part of the state was a little less mountainous than the eastern side, it was still incredibly mountainous. Even Morgantown was a city built all over a bunch of steep hills. Like, the Morgantown airport is literally built on top of a mountain. Then we got the Savage Divide, which is a mountain ridge that splits the map in half. I'm guessing this is meant to be the Appalachian Plateaus, but in real life, this region is just as forested as the western part of the state. The mountains are also not jagged with many sheer cliff faces, but are instead more rolling with some flatness to their tops. I just find it strange that this is really the only part of the map that's actually somewhat appropriately mountainous. It's still not enough, and there's a clear lack of deep, narrow ravines, but at least we got mountainous terrain here, unlike almost the entire rest of the map. Then there's the ash heap, which doesn't actually exist in West Virginia. This is just a giant open-air coal mine, which, sure, it looks visually striking, but it's not at all indicative of any location in West Virginia. In fact, the state has been clamping down on open-air coal mines since the 70s because they pollute the environment and waterways too much. Fictional setting though, so I'll give it a pass. The Toxic Valley, we never figured out what was going on with. In real life, Grafton and Clarksburg are between Morgantown and Sutton in the central western part of the state. In game, they're thrown on the northern border where Morgantown would actually be located near. Then they flattened out the area completely and covered it in white dust that's said to have been from the factories that got blown up in the region during the war. Not only is this biome not at all accurate in any way, it's also just ugly, wasted space, and hardly anything takes the player up there. Of the 150 hours we played, we might have spent 2 hours up there total. The Mire and Cranberry Bog are situated in what appears to be the Shenandoah Valley, which is actually Virginia. So a third of the map in this game isn't even in the state whose anthem was the promotional theme song for it. Also, this isn't marshland in real life, but rolling Appalachian foothills with farmland scattered about. Cranberry Bog is a real place in West Virginia, but it's a small, isolated park, not a major biome of the region. I think it's rather telling how badly they misinterpreted the character of West Virginia when you talk to the Overseer and she asks you if you've been to the mountains. Go ahead and ask a West Virginian that question and see the funny looks you're gonna get. This is like asking someone if they've been to the Walmart while standing inside of one.
Seen any elves?
But in the setting of 76, yeah, that's a perfectly valid question because the map has a singular mountain with only one real peak. Ultimately, I think the biggest problem with Bethesda's take on West Virginia is that they were trying to cover too much. Fallout 3 mostly takes place in DC with some of the surrounding Maryland and Virginia suburbs. Fallout 4 was, once again, mostly Boston with some notable suburbs and minor cities. But Fallout 76 is almost the entirety of the state of West Virginia and the Shenandoah Valley thrown in for good measure. Within its borders, West Virginia is about 24,000 square miles. If talking surface area though, it becomes over 52,000 square miles, which would make it the size of Alabama. Bethesda had to squeeze that and then some into a 16 square mile map, and as a result, I'm not at all surprised that the map really feels like an amusement park. Actually, it's not even that impressive. It's more like some diorama made by a high school class for a state fair. It's a fun map, but damn did visiting the real location ruin it for me. It's funny because when we were touring DC on day 3, I instantly picked up on that Fallout 3 really did capture the energy of its old historic locations and its metro stations extremely well. The devs are from that area, so it isn't surprising, but it just made us wonder even more why Bethesda wanted to set 76 in West Virginia. Did they just want a country setting and thought, oh yeah, West Virginia is rural, just plop it down there? Did they want a map that would let them experiment with more verticality the way they started to with Boston and Fallout 4? Does Todd or Emil have a vacation home in West Virginia and so it was just easy for them to get some reference photos one weekend? If they weren't even going to try to capture the scale of the geography and the energy of the setting, why bother? If there's one person who I think actually did visit West Virginia, it's Anand Zur. The legend returns with yet another banger soundtrack for 76 that does an excellent job capturing the different moods the region can inspire. A lot of the exploration tracks flow between tranquil and wondrous vibes into the eerie and unsettling. The instrumentation is a lot of natural sounds. Lots of woodwinds and subtle strings, with some of that iconic industrial noise that fits very well in the West Virginia setting. I'm glad to see, or hear in this case, Zur avoiding the usual soundscape you'd expect when something is meant to be country. While Bethesda themselves seem to fail to understand that there's a lot of different country identities in the US, Zur seem to hone in on what the Appalachian country might sound like. Normally I avoid getting into discussions about music because I just don't think I'm qualified most of the time to have something insightful to say. This time though, not only did I visit the location to get a sense of what the place's atmosphere felt like, I also listened to 76's soundtrack in its entirety while driving driving through parts of the state. When Pat and I hit the radio quiet zone near Greenbank, my Spotify was obviously knocked out with our cell service. Fortunately, I had put the entire OST on my phone before I left my house, so Pat put that on as we were driving through some of the most scenic and moody parts of the eastern side of the state. At first, we were a bit bummed it was raining on our second day because it was going to make flying the drone very difficult, but when we hit the east-westbound US 250 going along really curvy mountain roads between the Virginias and the misty rain, we could not have asked for more appropriate music. If fandom is to be believed, there's over 300 locations to discover on the map, which is actually a similar count to Fallout 4's Boston. This is because everything is more spread out in 76, and the exploration experience is, in my opinion, much better as a result. Fallout 4 felt way too cramped, like there was no chance for me to even try to get lost because there was always a few landmarks within view at any given time. 76 actually has a ton of wilderness that would have me referring to my map to keep myself orientated. Exploring empty parts of the map felt like I was, in fact, exploring and not just painting fast travel markers all over my map. Speaking of the world map, 76 has ditched the topographical satellite maps in our Pip-Boys for a fully illustrated map instead. And for the most part, I like this map much more. It's covered in little graphics that act as lures for players looking to explore, but not everything in the world has an illustration, and some physical features of the map are no longer applicable in post-war Appalachia. This keeps the map from being omniscient and ruining the thrill of exploration. Things like train tracks, roads, and mountain passes are also shown on the map, which definitely helps with navigation. I do find it funny, though, that Vault-Tec couldn't even get regional surveys and instead just gave their best and brightest maps that out-of-state tourists would pick up at the airport. It adds quite a bit of charm and character to the setting in a way that I never expected a graphical map really could. One thing I gotta bitch about, though, is the removal of the local map. I know, I can't remember the last time I've used it in a modern Bethesda game either, but holy shit was I clamoring for it in 76. The reason being, this game has huge dungeons. Remember how big the Corvego plant was in Fallout 4? That would now be considered a fairly common medium-sized dungeon. Places like the Poseidon Nuclear Power Plants, Grafton Steel Mill, and the AVR Medical Center are appropriately labyrinthine in their size and layouts and are a real joy to explore and loot. But you will be getting lost in some of them. You can't get trapped in them though, and that's because for the first time ever, we can now fast travel out of dungeons. While I'm not a big fan of fast travel and I'm a bit wary of expanding its powers even more, here I'm fine with a compromise because it lets me get to enjoy some really neat industrial complexes. Also, we don't have console commands or saves to reload if we ever get stuck in geometry. You can even now fast travel when there are enemies nearby, you just gotta wait a few seconds. Due to its size, fast traveling in Appalachia is pretty much essential, especially if you're doing lots of quests that often send you all over the map, or do public events which will just teleport you to their locations when you join them from the map. It's a neat detail that you can join public events by just walking up to the location they are taking place in, but good luck getting from the forest to the mire to complete a round of Moonshine Jamboree before the event ends if you're traveling by foot. Fast traveling requires players to fork over some caps. The cost depends upon the distance being traveled and the amount of caps a player has. It wasn't uncommon for me to get hit with a 40 or 50 cap traveling fee by the time I was in the endgame. And yeah, doing a few of those in a night could sting a bit. This is one of the few instances where teaming up with other players is great because you can fast travel to your teammates and their camps and survival tents for free. You can even fast travel to the dungeon they are in. This isn't going to teleport you to their exact location, it's only going to drop you off at the entrance to the place, but it's still convenient enough to justify matching up with some randos once you land in a server. Now that I'm in the charitable mood, there's one feature I want to heap some praise onto, and that's the game's photo mode. At any time, you can open up the main menu and enter photo mode, which opens up a whole suite of camera tools for taking pictures of yourself in the environment. Pat and I leveraged this a lot during our playthrough to document our adventures, and it was just a fun thing to get to do some group photos in a game like this. Not only will it save your photos to look at in the main menu and export them for your own use, it will also take those photos and turn them into biome-specific loading screens. It's such a subtle thing, but a genuinely fantastic innovation I would be surprised does not make a return in Starfield and beyond. I think the biggest disservice done towards 76's Appalachia is that exploring for its own sake is kinda pointless. The few times Pat and I did it in the early game, we ended up kicking ourselves over it later on because quests would send us back to those same regions and even send us into the same dungeons. While Bethesda has a way of making exploring in their games fun, they've yet to crack making revisiting a location fun. There's also the Skyrim issue of finding locations that are related to a quest, and if you don't have the quest in your journal, the place is at best pointless and at worst going to lead to some sort of malfunction. We came across a settlement of raiders who were all hostile and started shooting at us, so we started shooting back. Turns out some of them were quest NPCs or something, so a bunch of them were set as essential. Even dropping them into their down state didn't end their bloodlust, so Pat and I just had to run away from these unkillable raiders. I really can't believe the hellscape essential flags have created is only getting worse in these games. Coming up on night 3, and we finally made it to Charleston. This is another big set-piece location where the world designers kind of just went nuts with the environmental storytelling. It's a neat location, and I like how any major route into the city leads through some kind of carefully built arena. I remember my first time in 2021, I got to the city by following the dried riverbed, and this led to a tense combat sequence where I was getting ambushed by orc snipers while mutants rushed me from the city. The second time I approached from the west, and that led past a nuclear power plant and through a bunch of packs of feral ghouls. The third time was with Pat, and we took a makeshift bridge through a tight orc security checkpoint. The potato server we were playing on dampened the experience a bit, but it was still neat finding yet another way into the city ruins. At this point in our adventure, I officially joined the ranks of Fallout 76's bourgeoisie after breaking down and paying up for Fallout first. I was sold on the subscription after seeing all the cool things Pat had access to our first couple of nights, like the survival tent and well, I guess that's all I really cared about, actually. There is more to Fallout first than just a survival tent, but I won't lie and say it wasn't anything but the on-demand bank that got me to cough up the $12.99 plus tax. The survival tent was a real lifesaver for my sanity when it came to the awful constant inventory management 76. But it turns out 2 other Fallout First perks are just as notable. There's the access to private servers, which I already talked at length about, exclusive access to better performing servers that are able to spawn more enemies in a game where loot farming is a core part of the progression. Yeah, I'd say that alone qualifies as a pay-to-win scheme. But wait, it gets worse. You also get access to the scrap box and the ammo box. These 2 items seemed entirely benign to me at first, mostly because I didn't understand how they even worked, because Bethesda is really bad at explaining how things work in this game, but also because I didn't understand how player storage works in 76 until I was given an abrupt lesson by the game. 2 things in Fallout 76 violate what I've come to expect from item storage systems in a Bethesda game. First, all player-owned storage boxes are linked together. So, in Fallout 4, players were free to build as many containers in their settlements as they wanted and fill them with whatever they liked. Many players used this freedom to make warehouses where they could meticulously organize all their items based on their own categories because the inventory menus in Fallout 4 were total ass. There were also workshop inventories the player could dump items into, and those inventories linked with all the crafting stations in a settlement to ease the tedium of crafting. It was a good system, I liked it. You could even link up workshops between settlements by assigning settlers to caravan duty. This created a bit of gameplay consideration because, while it was nice to have your workshop linked, this meant you had one less NPC for resource harvesting. Fallout 76 said, fuck all that noise, player storage containers will act like linked workshops. Even the random crafting stations all over the map are magically linked to the player's stash. It's convenient, sure, but it means building any storage outside of a stash box in your camp is utterly worthless. This is weird because the game has a whole bunch of schematics for storage items it will give you when all you want are schematics for upgrades for your guns, but I digress. The second change is that your stash now has a weight limit not too dissimilar to player encumbrance. But where players are free to over-encumber themselves, the stash limit is a hard limit. You cannot push past it and just deal with some mild inconvenience. So this means I was actually doing a big no-no when I dumped 400 pounds of dirty water into my stash just so that I wouldn't have to worry about water for a few play sessions. This wasn't a big deal in the early game when I wasn't even close to hitting the 1,200 pound stash limit, but when I entered the end game grind for legendary weapons, I was promptly educated on the necessity of stash management. After getting a few 40+ pound pieces of legendary power armor and miniguns, yeah, I hit that limit fast. This is where the scrap box can help. As it turns out, the weight of all the junk items you accumulate in 76 starts to add up pretty quickly. The game has a system for breaking down junk weapons and armor at crafting stations into their base crafting components, significantly cutting down on weight. The scrap box can do this automatically for junk, while also putting those components into their own bottomless storage that links with the magical player stash network. So let me give some perspective here. By the time I hit the end game, I had accumulated over 600 pounds worth of junk components. That would have eaten up half of my stash box limit, but because I was part of the upper class now, that was not the case. Ammo can also weigh a decent amount, not nearly as much as junk, but it could still be a consideration. Fallout First members get an ammo box, and I'm sure you can intuit what that does. This is very much a case of Bethesda inventing a problem that never existed in one of their games before, and then selling players the means to sort of fix it. I guess just removing the stash limit entirely for paying members would be tipping their hand too much, so they came up with some really sleazy things like the scrap box to try to lampshade it. A bit of trivia, the stash box limit used to be £400. I cannot imagine playing this game where I'm already being actively punished for not neurotically looting everything, but with a puny £400 plus my character's carrying capacity. The theory I came up with was that players were originally not meant to stockpile junk. Instead, the idea was that if players wanted to craft some upgrades, they'd spend a few hours doing their farming for the necessary components because that would be content. Any way you slice it, the limits on player storage is genuinely nefarious. Player progression is directly tied to gear and upgrades for that gear. Players can craft weapons and armor now, which turns out to be very useful for unlocking crafting schematics for upgrades, but crafting 1,000 guns to break down in order to beat out RNG and get all the schematics obviously eats up a lot of resources. As a result, if you're not looting all the time, you're only making more work for yourself later. As it turns out, more work later is likely what the designers are exactly going for, but that's getting into a discussion best saved for the endgame grind. Believe me, the stash limit is just the tip of the iceberg here. So it shouldn't come as a surprise that players were kinda miffed by Fallout First when it was introduced. A part of that was no doubt due to it being introduced before the game had its redemption arc with Wastelanders. Instead, it was rolled out in the middle of the infamous nuclear winter season. The player base still hadn't been cowed to Bethesda's design ideas in 76 just yet. This led to Fallout First members getting bullied in public lobbies by non-First members when they were caught using something like a survival tent or a First exclusive emote or player icon. Another perk of Fallout First is access to custom worlds. Private servers where player progression is disabled, but the player has access to all sorts of options. Basically, it's console commands. Can't believe we've gone from being able to modify our games however we want to paid mods and then paid mods 2.0 to now just paying to get console commands. Don't worry, as of April 2020, proper modding tools for 76 were still being worked on. Sure. It's a shame custom worlds are price gated because they're actually kinda neat. They have their own progression and you can import characters into them. So I could take Esbern at level 130, set up a custom world, and bring him over with everything that entails. Progression on a custom world won't carry back over to a public or private server running the standard adventure mode, but if you're based enough not to care about 76's progression treadmills, living exclusively in a custom world of your own making isn't a bad fate. If anything, I'd almost recommend that if you want to play 76 like it's Fallout 4.5, but I don't want to encourage anyone to subscribe to Fallout First, so please don't. Also, Fallout 76 will never be Fallout 4.5 no matter how hard you try. What you get are things like difficulty settings, disabling fast travel, free crafting, less restrictive camp building, and unrestricted PvP. In testing this feature, I set up a more hardcore server where the game was actually able to challenge me, and it made me so depressed that this wasn't the base game or at least an opt-in experience, I had to stop playing after a couple of hours. What's even more depressing is that a hardcore game mode did exist. It was a separate game mode to adventure mode called survival mode. It came with the Wild Appalachia update, but was removed a few months later because it required too much playtesting to balance. Custom Worlds do have a free version to hopefully entice players to pay for the full thing. Every season has a free pre-made mode setup. When Pat and I were playing, it was a free build mode that just let players build whatever they wanted in camps. Useful, I guess, for planning out things to build in adventure mode, but I can't really imagine this being useful for pretty much anyone else. As of writing this, a new season for 76 dropped, and the free build world was replaced with High Risk, which is just a watered-down survival mode. Unrestricted PvP, no player perks, no legendary effects, limited fast travel, and increased items dropped when you die. It wasn't fun. Also, I got a message saying the game was building the world, which is the same message I get when booting up a private server, leading me to think not a single other person was playing, so it had to actually boot a server up for me. So there goes the PvP aspect. And that's Fallout First. Oh yeah, it also deposits 1,600 Bethesda bucks into your account every month, offers increased rewards from the scoreboard, and sometimes offers discounts on items in the Atomic Shop. If you're deprived enough to commit to this game long term, I guess you could justify the cost. Just do yourself the favor and remember to cancel when you aren't playing. Please, the free atoms each month, they aren't worth it. What were we even talking about? Oh yeah, Charleston. Actually, not a whole lot happened our first night there. We mostly just explored the ruins for a while, doing the usual killing and looting. I ended up getting sucked into a side quest that subjected me to a test to become an executive at a big pre-war mining corporation, and this was delivered with the subtlety I've come to expect from a Bethesda Fallout title. I bring up the stuff at Hornwright HQ because not only is it a great example of the limp observations 76 likes to ambush players with in its environmental storytelling, but also because it helps introduce a new storytelling method Bethesda cooked up for 76, multiple choice tests. I'm not even joking, 76 has many examples of multiple choice tests being used as diegetic storytelling methods. The one in Hornwright HQ was at least brief, and the correct answers could be intuited once you got on the writer's absurd juvenile wavelength, but the others I came across were not nearly as straightforward. After getting vaccinated against the plague, yes, it was that trivial that I can gloss over it in less than a sentence, Pat and I headed off to the last leg of the Responders questline at the nearby fire station to join the Fire Breathers. This was the more militant branch of the Responders, who went on high-risk operations against the Scorched. You get it? Fire Breathers? They're firefighters, they're fighting the Scorched. Our first step for signing up with the Fire Breathers was a multiple choice test. There's environmental details scattered throughout the firehouse that will give you the answers, or you can just look them up online. It turned out my first test was just trying to get into the terminal the test was located on.
Oh my god, there's a quiz.
Why is it not letting me use the terminal? I hit it, my UI flickers, and then it just... Wait, where did my UI go? Wait, what? My UI is gone now. My entire HUD's just gone.
Are you able to move?
Yeah, I'm able to move. Just, my HUD is gone. I just want to use the fucking terminal. God damn it, my UI's still broken.
Oh. You're sliding around the room in the animation.
Oh, okay, so I'm probably desynced. Let me fast travel somewhere. Oh, can I not open my map? Oh, I can't do anything now. So I was able
to...
a
restart job.
So I'm able to open my Pip-Boy. I can't even open the fucking menu to quit the game. I'm going to just I cannot fast travel at this time. Oh. Oh. I am completely desynced.
Yeah, you're gonna have to restart,
Guess,
Control-Alt-Delete restart.
Yep,
That's
guess
impressive.
Alt-F4. The test is mostly a bunch of real-life and in-universe trivia about first aid, survival techniques, and small unit tactics. The real test came afterwards when Pat and I had to go into a smoldering mine filled with Scorched, hit a button, and survive the enemies lured over by the sounding alarm. It was so good I got to do it twice. Because I didn't listen to a training holotape before going into the mine, my quest objective never updated to tell me to hit the alarm. So when Pat did it, it did not count my contribution. Then it was back to Charleston to finish the last Fire Breathers test. This one was an on-foot obstacle course. Yet another gameplay innovation that would see itself recycled a lot in 76. Fortunately, running obstacle courses is more engaging in 76 than multiple choice tests, so I didn't mind these as much. The Fire Breathers one was kinda busted though. You could follow all the arrows through the crumbling buildings down to the ground floor, or you could just jump down from the starting line's balcony and skip half the course. The second half of the Responders questline was definitely a noticeable step down from what they had going on for the first half. That's not to say the first half was particularly thrilling, but it at least had some moody atmosphere at times, and the quest structure did seem to welcome exploration. The second half started setting the pattern of busy work quests that, if the player woke up for a moment, might start to question why they were even doing these things. Well, let's just say the next chapter was gonna have me asking that a lot more often. So after cheating on 2 of our tests and basically walking through the combat one, Pat and I were finally full-blown fire breathers. We were ready to take the fight to Parthenax and avenge the Responders, but the story had other plans. Another terminal was putting us on the hunt for one Hank Madigan, who was last seen heading over to the top of the world to parley with the raiders there in order to install an uplink thing that would establish a Scorch detection network. Or at least that's what Pat in the wiki told me after I found out my original draft for this section was off with the details. You see, we're about to be put in contact with Rose, the first NPC we actually get to interact with in this story. And let's just say my brain wanted to make extra sure it fully repressed all memories of this character because it seems the memory loss was a bit retroactive. Between getting our shots and finishing our fire-breathing tests, Pat and I took some time to do some exploration and housekeeping. The first thing I did was head back to Morgantown to learn about that vaccine so I could clear that old quest out of my journal. This had me stumbling upon the Christmas event that would be running for most of our playthrough, turning what was meant to be a quick chore into a very profitable diversion. What the fuck? I found a Santa Scorched. Oh god, he has a super sludge.
Yeah, that's part of the Christmas event.
It gave me an Assassin M79 grenade launcher. Plus 50% damage against humans. Oh my god. If you played Fallout 4, you might remember legendary enemies. Beefed up mini-bosses that, when killed, would drop legendary equipment. Legendary equipment are basically enchanted items. Gear blessed with unique attributes like offering more protection from a certain enemy type or doing more damage the lower your health is. Fallout 76 greatly expanded the types of enchantments and even added a ranking system to them in the form of stars. The number of stars directly correlates to the number of enchantments on the item. Technically, the system goes up to 5 stars, but you will never see anything higher than 3 stars. Our guess is that Bethesda saw just how brokenly OP 3-star legendaries can be, so they called it at that and never implemented anything past it. The Christmas event added Legendary Scorched, who are decked out in Santa costumes and will drop legendary items, along with gift wrap packages and occasionally high-level melee weapons. The gifts were loot boxes that usually just gave some junk items and chems, and the melee weapons weren't really anything to care about because they weren't legendaries. The legendaries were the real rewards, especially for when we found them in our mid-level 20s. At the airport, there's an event players are able to trigger that recreates the responders' last stand against the Scorched by spawning several waves of them the players need to fend off. Turns out this event has a very high chance of spawning 1 or 2 Santas with each wave, and with 5 waves to the event, well, you can guess what we ended up doing.
There's 5 waves of Scorched coming. Oh god, it includes Santa Scorched.
Stop, I'm over encumbered as it is.
I'm sorry, did we make a mistake playing this during the holiday event?
I think we did. Instigating, oh god, instigating short hunting rifle. And a Chinese officer sword.
A shish kebab.
Double damage if target is at
35.
full health. And I can turn that into a sniper rifle.
This is fucked, dude.
Dude, is this glitched right now? This can't
we have
be. This can't
We have an
be.
event where it's spawning waves of fucking Scorched, and the event is that when there's like a random chance for Scorched to be Santa, so we're just like,
What is
we've
going
literally
on?
found out how to farm these things.
I can't move. I'm over encumbered. It's time for
It's time for drugs.
yeah.
They were like, yeah, this will be a fun little level 10 event where they fight 5 waves of Scorched,
Holy
and then we walk away with like 10 fucking
Dude.
legendaries.
What the fuck? I am so over encumbered. I'm almost double my equipment burden right now. Okay. All right. I
We
gotta
have to recover.
Yeah.
Holy crap. I have a fucking dagger that does more damage if I'm fed, and I'm literally impossible. It's impossible for me to starve.
Up and
Troubleshooters.
Here's our supply
got it.
drop.
I like that what we got from the money drop is significantly less
Oh yeah.
worthless compared to what just happened.
We ended up farming this thing almost every night because, after discovering the event, I set my main camp a few yards away from the runway. The Christmas event, in conjunction with some double XP events that popped up, did a lot to subsidize our playthroughs and probably saved us a few nights of recording. Pat also ended up getting an insanely powerful double-barrel shotgun that did explosive damage and would heal him a percentage of the damage he dealt. After Pat got this shotgun, he was basically playing a different game than me. Where he could 1 or 2 shot most enemies without ever losing health, I had to scrimp by with hiding, popping chems, and taking pot shots with the best pea shooters I could get my hands on. His shotgun was so powerful that he was never able to find a weapon that could replace it.
Yep, I gotta say it. I fucking hate this game.
What,
Do you know what level we were when I got this fucking shotgun? Because I remember at the time, I was wanting to upgrade shotguns, and so I was starting to look for shotguns that were above level 45. And we did the event in Morgantown, and it dropped, and
The rest was history.
literally nothing could replace it in this game. I've used so many different types of weapons. I've tried so many different things to try and find something that could parallel it.
He also got a vampiric lever rifle that he donated to me just so I could get in on the immortal playstyle. I still wasn't able to compete with his double barrel, but the division of the combat labor was equalized a bit more thanks to it. This really goes to show just how much luck factors into the progression of Fallout 76. I kept getting screwed on the legendary weapon slot machine, and even if we both lost or won on that front, we were both lucky just because we had access to Santas and double XP. We also got lucky because those gifts also gave us schematics for the vintage water cooler, a camp item that generates endless amounts of purified water for free. It doesn't even require electricity like the industrial water purifiers most players put into their camps. With purified water being a valuable item to sell to NPC vendors for caps, and my water supply passively generating 100 bottles every few hours, getting loaded on caps was pretty much a foregone conclusion. The player experience in 76 can vary so wildly depending on just the time of year you play. Dedicated players are kinda justified in the FOMO they have developed for this game's content. RNG isn't the only thing that makes 76's progression weird and kinda frustrating. The way perk cards, armor, and weapons are arbitrarily level gated also contributes while drawing that very deep line in the sand between early and mid game at character level 50. Every weapon and armor piece has a minimum character level that determines if the player can equip it or if it will even spawn an instance loot. These levels move in 10 level increments, capping out at either level 45 or 50 depending on the item's floor level. In a game where character levels are uncapped and the average player's level is measured in the hundreds, I think you can start to see what the major problem with this system is. To make it even more obvious, Pat and I will be hitting level 50 in the next main story chapter. Halfway into the main story, which is maybe 20 hours of playtime, and the item leveling system becomes completely irrelevant because everything you will be coming across will be at its max level. I wouldn't be surprised if some long-term players forgot equipment has levels because nothing in the mid or end game even refers to the system. But thank goodness the system leaves so quickly because all it encourages is stopping every 5 to 10 levels to completely cycle out all your old equipment for new appropriately leveled items. This is because item levels also affects the stats of the item, so a level 5 pipe pistol will do less damage than a level 10. Remember, this is a game that encourages you to be modifying your equipment to upgrade its stats. This means cycling out items will require you to upgrade all that new gear again, assuming you even have the schematics and perk cards to make those new upgrades. Fallout 4 would let you unequip upgrades and then move them onto a similar item for free. I have no idea why that system was removed in 76, because I wasted a lot of materials I wasn't able to effectively farm yet just upgrading new equipment to maximize my damage resistance and damage output. And you want to be maximizing your stats as much as you can because every item is level scaled. There are upper limits to level scaling because there are upper limits to player damage output, but in the early game you aren't anywhere near that being a thing, so you will be directly competing with the level scaled enemies. This means just relying on the base stats of your equipment isn't gonna be enough. I mean, it will be. Like I said, it is an easy game, but it's gonna be much more tedious. So the dilemma becomes, do I upgrade all that higher leveled gear I got? Do I just stick with my old gear? Do I upgrade my old gear even more to try to squeeze out another couple of hours of playtime out of it? Or do I just say fuck it all, ignore upgrades entirely, rely on the base stats of all my gear, and just deal with the longer, more boring combat encounters? If I wasn't forced to stop every 2 to 4 hours during the early game to do inventory and equipment management, this system wouldn't have been as bad. But the fact that it was something that was constantly a concern made the early game my least favorite leg of the playthrough from a gameplay perspective. This system introduced so much micromanagement for zero gameplay benefit. It was just another chore I had to do if I didn't want the combat experience to degrade even more. There's so much wrong with this system that I'm just going to offer 2 solutions here. Either remove leveled equipment entirely, or acknowledge that character levels continue past 50 and extend max item levels into the 200 or 300 range. Are either of these solutions perfect? No, of course not. Leveled items in an MMO exists to keep players from rushing for the best items, and it's generally meant to smooth out the progression to make some items more viable. As well, raising the ceiling doesn't really address the main fun-killing issues with the current system, but just dilutes it by dragging it out. This could also end up gating off weapons players might really want for far too long. The problem is that Bethesda's taking an MMO solution to a system that can't really tolerate it. They are, in effect, ranking the different guns in each weapon class. For example, the double-barrel shotgun unlocks after the pump action. As a result, double barrels deal more DPS. Like, full stop, they are objectively superior, even when accounting for weapon upgrades. This ends up throwing all the unique attributes of the different shotguns out the window. Things like fire rate, reload speed, and different kinematics are disregarded just because bigger DPS is better. Fallout 4 suffered from this issue too, but to a lesser degree. The level scaling wasn't as aggressive in that game, and the weapon mods and perks at least made running your favorite guns a bit more viable. Worst came to worst, you always had the difficulty setting to tweak down if you really loved a weaker gun. Fallout 4 also had a really slim selection of guns, which sucked for variety, but it did help make each weapon feel more distinct. Enter 76, and I'm dropping the Somerset Special, a gun I really liked in the early game, just because I got it at level 20, and so by level 50 its damage was completely outclassed. Bear in mind, not only did I have all the necessary damage upgrades for it, I was also fully spec'd with my perk cards to use the weapon type. There just came a point where I had to ditch the thing. Eventually, I had to ditch 6 shooters in general because the entire weapon class had fallen off, but that's a different story. This issue has a very simple solution that I'm surprised hasn't been implemented yet. Just let us upgrade the level of an item. If I want to bump my level 20 Somerset to 50, just charge me some steel and screws and whatnot to do it at a weapon workbench. 76's weapon balancing is a complete disaster, which was the main cited reason for why they gave up on all their PvP game modes. Weapon balancing in an online game is a really tricky thing to begin with, but especially when you need to balance a system that aims to also make every weapon feel distinct and fun in their own right. The item leveling system added even more unnecessary complexity to the equation that I don't think even classic Blizzard could have managed to balance well. Armor is not as badly affected by leveling, mostly due to the fact that wearing armor is a passive thing, so you aren't going to be married to a set of armor just because you like it. Well, unless you like the aesthetics, on the off chance you're wearing an outfit that will actually display it. In theory, there's meant to be a distinction between the different armor types. Many materials have light and heavy variants. Some materials have higher energy resistance, others more damage resistance, others break faster. I actually don't know what the benefit marine armor is meant to offer because its item durability drops so quickly. Oh yeah, item durability is back. I haven't mentioned it yet because, well, there's just not much to note. It's balanced well enough, I suppose. Some items break too quickly for no reason, while some items, like the black powder weapons, have their super high burst damage balanced by their low durability. There's perk cards you can get to reduce item degradation, like the Weaponsmith perk, which creates a benefit for keeping it equipped even when you aren't crafting weapon upgrades. There were a few times when my weapons broke on me in the middle of an event, and that was almost always my fault for not checking before I left my camp. It seems like some enemies, like Assaultrons, can degrade weapons faster, but I haven't been able to confirm that. I'd approve if that was the case though. But yeah, armor wasn't as frustrating to juggle just because I decided to focus on getting the lightest armor that offered the most damage resistance, which turned out to just be upgraded light leather. It still sucked when I'd have to swap out my entire set for a higher level set, especially when I was burning through adhesive and ballistic fiber to upgrade that new set all over again. It just didn't piss me off as much as losing the Somerset Special because I wasn't losing something I felt moment to moment in combat. Like I said, perk cards are also level gated, but this isn't nearly as destructive to the experience. It does mean that if you're metagaming and trying to go for a specific build, you'll likely be picking up some cards that you don't want or that will be replaced at a later level. This isn't the biggest issue though, because perk cards can be scrapped for perk coins, which are used to unlock legendary perk cards. We'll talk more about that when we hit the mid-game because that's another level 50 unlock. Instead, I just want to talk about some of the character builds I had going. Due to the confluence of leveled items, level-gated perk cards, level-scaled enemies, randomized legendary item drops, and just my inexperience with the game overall, none of these character builds ended up staying long-term. In the case of my first build, it never even got off the ground because I just picked objectively bad perks. Originally, I was going for a high luck build to stack a bunch of cards that would give me extra meds, ammo, food, and caps when looting containers. Seemed like a smart thing to get started on early to maximize my gains. This was another reason I was the loot goblin of the party. As I said earlier, food and chems are stupidly abundant to the point that it destroys the survival elements of the game. As well, caps are a joke thanks to infinite purified water. To spoil a rant to come, ammo is also stupidly abundant, creating an even bigger issue than chems and food. So my first idea for a build was rendered pointless fairly quickly and never got past a few perk investments. My second build started when I got the Somerset Special and a lever-action rifle and decided I wanted to make Esbern a cowboy. This had me fully investing into non-auto rifles and non-auto pistols, which were 3 rank cards, so a total of 18 perk cards overall. This had the added benefit of scale. Non-auto rifles are by far the most abundant weapons in the game, and are usually the default configuration for most rifles you'll find. Non-auto pistols wasn't the most populated weapon class, but definitely more than auto pistols, which only has 2 weapons, both of which fall off after mid-game. As well, pistols don't weigh much, so I could carry a whole arsenal and still have room to spare for my klepto habits. Well, turns out the cowboy build sucks because 6-shooters, and non-auto pistols in general, really fall off hard by the end game. Believe me, I tried to make anything work because the thought of dropping 9 perk cards from my deck hurt way too much to accept. Eventually I did, but yeah, I was not happy about that. The non-auto rifles dropping off was the more perplexing issue. Even with me replacing my pistol cards for VATS enhancing cards that allowed me to start doing critical damage, the non-auto rifles just could not keep up. Even though with shotguns, Pat was finding slower fire rate equaled more total DPS, the rifles did not conform to that rule. Turned out, auto rifles completely outclass non-autos. Auto rifles also synergize better with critical perks. When I got over my existential crisis in realizing the entire cowboy build had been an utter failure and spec'd into auto rifles instead, I finally started reaching Pat's combat effectiveness, even though I still didn't have the perfect god roll 3-star legendary auto rifle. So, what was Pat doing aside from blasting things with his G-tier shotgun?
My god, yes!
What? Why are you sliding on the floor? What the
Am I sliding?
fuck? What the fuck are you doing? What?
I'm a cannibal.
Aside from eating people, Pat spec'd into strength and endurance and completed the party tank role by occasionally whipping out a set of power armor that he just kept stored in his back pocket.
Now check this out. So I get out of the power armor, and it's in my inventory.
What the fuck? The power armor is in your inventory?
Yeah, it weighs 10 pounds.
What?
What? You have a problem with that? You have a problem with that? I'll put it back down. Here. There's my power armor. Yeah, no, it's in my inventory.
What the fuck?
Is there some kind of issue that you're having?
You might have noticed, and will continue to notice for the rest of the playthrough, Pat was consistently 2 to 4 levels past me. This was not because he was killing everything while I looted. As far as I can tell, base XP gain is shared equally in a party. This was because Pat had stacked his intelligence early, because that's where the cards he wanted to unlock were located, and he had some charisma cards that boosted his XP gain when in a party. We realized the level disparity too late for me to catch up, even though I aggressively expanded into intelligence and grabbed those party XP cards. In the early game, faster XP gain is a big deal because that means you will be spending less time in the shittiest parts of the progression. By the end game though, level ups become almost meaningless because odds are you have all the perk cards you want. By the end of our playthroughs, we both had finished out our main builds and were working on secondary and even tertiary builds because might as well if we have the level ups to spend. If there's one thing I had going over Pat though, it was that I had spec'd into lockpicking where he went into hacking. Let me make this abundantly clear. Do not invest in hacking. It is a trap. If there is something to hack, odds are there is a lock to circumvent it. As well, there's a legendary perk card that lets you lockpick and hack, so even if you do come across the rare terminal you want to hack, you can just get this card and not waste the intelligence card slots.
Finally, something I can hack. Bet it's useless. Oh, first try. Safe control? Oh. Hang on. Where's the safe? What level is it? It's level 1. Do you want to get the XP for unlocking it?
Yeah.
I like how that literally always informs my decisions in these games, is how much XP can I get out of it. Yeah, I had that joke too. Oh my god, I'm glad I wasted all this time for 14 experience in a terminal that doesn't fucking say anything! Start. Oh, this is a terminal named after a guy here. Personal logs. And why are there fucking 10?
Oh, there's a level 2 terminal up here as well, if you want to...
Finally, a use for me.
Where's the safe that it unlocks?
I'm probably picklocking it right now. There's no way it's a level 2 lock, but it's only gonna have like...
Oh, it opens the door downstairs. My God, why are there fucking 10 journal entries in here?
'Cause, I fucking can't. I fucking can't with this game, dude. Hack got it so rough. The games are always biased towards, like, picklock, but holy shit, dude.
I literally cannot give Hack anything. Because if you have Master Lockpick, you don't need fucking Hack.
I can't, dude. It's so bad. Alright, let's talk about camps. I've seen many people say they prefer 76's camp system over 4's settlements, and I can see where they're coming from, but I still have to disagree. The main benefit the camp system offers is that you can place your camp anywhere, as opposed to being limited to the predefined placement of workshops. In reality, you can only place your camp out in the wilderness away from any locations you'd be able to fast travel to or zones reserved by quests. This means you can't do things like build a camp on the rooftops of Morgantown or claim one of the many houses in an obscure town like Helvetia. I saw someone build a camp attached to the train station in Sutton once, but I'm gonna assume this is either an exploit or an oversight. It's certainly not the norm. So while the new placement system lets players utilize the expansive Appalachian wilderness, you're not going to be getting a place like Hangman's Alley in Fallout 4. As a result, camps often end up looking pretty much identical to one another. Some permutation of a box shack with whatever bells and whistles the owner either grinded to unlock or just coughed up cash for in the atomic shop. I gotta say, the encroachment of the atomic shop here also ruins the experience quite a bit. When I saw an impressive camp in the wild, my first thought was never, wow, that's a really neat bit of self-expression and creativity. It was, I wonder how much money they paid for that. This could just be a me problem, but this is why I find even paid cosmetics to be obnoxious and intrusive in most games. I feel like a camp would be the ultimate way to flex on others, a way for the hardcore players to show off their skills and dedication and make the plebs super jealous as they begrudgingly use all the nice convenience features in the camp. I hate to draw the comparison, but old school RuneScape really nailed this. When you saw a dude decked out in full dragon plate with a white party hat and a 99 construction skill cape, you knew that degenerate was loaded. It was impressive because, outside of buying gold from bot farmers, there was no way to acquire that setup with real money. What you were looking at was time and dedication, and that meant something. We also had houses in RuneScape, and some players were so ballin' they'd throw parties in their house, and people would show up because there were tons of rare and very expensive convenience features that the owner had installed. This is what the camp system should have been, especially since 76 and RS are both very grindy games. Instead, the only draw players might have to someone's house is to check out their shop kiosk and use their decontamination arc.
This guy's really gone for it.
Wash the dust off and have a drink. Oh boy. Oh man, he has like a bar.
No, it's like a music lounge. Oh no, it's a strip club.
What are these things called?
A banjo?
No. This like stage. No, they're outdoors. God, fuck.
Auditorium?
It's kind of like an auditorium, but there's a specific name for it. Like they're... Oh, he logged off. Yes. More shit for the video. Oh, why am I like... Oh, God. I can see... Do I look weird right now? Like, is my head tilted back? Like, I'm staring at the sky? Okay. Well, that's what's going on my screen right now.
Oh, my map is so zoomed out I can see the entire thing.
Oh.
I can't zoom back in. Oh, I think I managed to get it back into bounds.
Camps are a nice place to rest and recompose yourself as you engage in obligatory inventory and equipment management. There's a few places in the world where you can find every crafting station, but the best place to have a good setup is in your own camp. You can also set up resource farms, which was mostly what my camp was about. You can also get an NPC to come hang out at your camp to whisper sweet nothings while serenading you with sporadic bursts of 15 seconds of music. What? What is this?
She's a settler. She lives at our camp now.
Where'd you find her? Also, where's the rest of your
Just on the side of the road. Yeah, about that. It didn't work either.
Which is a very positive attitude. Oh, now she is the NPC walking around playing music while we're sleeping.
You feel a kindred spirit. What the fuck does that mean?
We're not sleeping in the same bed together, Fallout.
She gave me a quest to get a weapon.
Oh, shit.
So she actually does stuff. Oh, she's sitting down.
Oh, there we go. This is the best song I've ever heard in my life.
I'm pretty sure it keeps everybody in tempo, but
Yeah.
like the piano piece sucks. What the fuck?
It's literally the same.
Which makes sense if it's a drum beat. I'm doing like a simple roll here, but
Yeah. Some unique NPCs can be recruited if you build them a special place to hang out at and will offer quests and temporary buffs if you talk to them. There might be more to this system, but I wouldn't really know. I started to get into Beckett's questline, but just lost any interest after I found out it was mostly going to be clearing out raider bases. As well, a lot of these allies are either paywalled or are part of the FOMO board, so they can honestly just fuck right off. I'd still take Fallout 4's settlements over this. Having NPCs I had to provide for added something else to consider when planning how to use a space. As well, I did enjoy feeling like a feudal lord providing for my peasants who paid me in resources and services. It was also satisfying to come back to a settlement a few hours later and find a couple new people in the mix. While there was a lot that would have made the system better, I still liked the colony building minigame it introduced. Also, the larger build spaces and higher build budgets let me get more creative with my settlements. Speaking of space limitations, the Steel Dawn update added shelters. These are instanced camps where a lot of the object placement limitations have been eased at the cost of many new limitations, such as not being able to place resource items like water coolers. They're an interesting idea, and a lot of builder players have latched onto them as a way of getting to make more creative bases without the game coming through and messing up their stuff with NPC raids or just the server failing to load their build correctly. I found them to be a bit annoying though, because there's no way to fast travel directly into them. You have to place the entrance of a shelter in your camp, and then use the entrance to load into that zone. This means if I was fast traveling to my shelter, I had to sit through 2 loading screens just to get inside the thing. And if I had to hop out for a second to grab something from one of my farms, well, that's going to be another 1 or 2 loading screens. That's a lot of waiting around for no real benefit other than the novelty of getting a cozy little bunker to decorate. Bethesda has also built a serious racket around these things that I find a bit distasteful. The only bunker you get for free is this tiny Vault-Tec-styled lobby. If you want something bigger and cooler, well, you're gonna have to pay up in the atomic shop. And these aren't cheap either, clocking in anywhere from $12 to $15 depending on the shelter and the atom bundle you're buying. The pictures and the descriptions of them in the shop are very misleading and, in my opinion, do a terrible job of selling the things, but I can see some financially irresponsible 76 fans dropping the atoms to see it rather than doing the thing that I did, which was just looking up videos of the places on YouTube. This isn't even the worst part for me though. No, that's reserved for the fact that each shelter is bigger than the last. The most recent one added with the Pitt expeditions is an absolutely massive urban space with a build height of something like 4 or 5 stories. Oh yeah, I guess there is a way to get Hangman's Alley, you just have to pay $14. Thanks, Bethesda. What this does is prey on the hopeless people who get sucked into this build space arms race with the game, and I can't help but see this as some kind of induced demand. If the developers could make shelters this big, why weren't some of them this big to start with? Why is the free bunker the smallest shelter? It's one thing to give paid shelters different forms of eye candy like a live nuclear test site or an aquarium. It's another to keep offering more of what people really want these things for, but at the cost of paying up again. I dropped some of my Fallout First Atom allowance money on the Pitt one because it was the biggest. I loaded it up, confirmed, yup, it's big, and never entered it or another shelter again. I get the limitations placed on camps are the result of it being an online game. What I don't get is why the building system wasn't utilized at all outside the Battle Royale mode that got killed off. Why are we not getting quests that give us a tower defense stage where we gotta build the tower and its defenses? Just think about all the potential this would have for puzzle sequences. Then again, people really hated that segment in Far Harbor, myself included, but that was just bad design and implementation. It wasn't a bad idea. The closest I've heard to this being a thing are players who'd build special camps for killing the Scorch Beast during her global event. While that is a creative use of the system, it's first off, not necessary, and second off, almost certainly not an intended use case by the developers. It would be awesome if there were public events that required players to build defenses with each other, and maybe completing goals would unlock schematics for better defenses. Or it would encourage players to form teams where everyone would pool the schematics they have unlocked to make the best structures they could manage. There's so much the system could do, but instead camps are relegated to nothing more than a convenience. Probably because Bethesda couldn't be bothered to implement more uses for it, but also because they were afraid to force everyone to use it. If there's one compliment I can pay the system, it's that it did provide one of the only times where Pat and I could offer each other exclusive services. For example, when Pat decided to build Skyhaven Temple out in the Savage Divide one night, I came in a few nights later to be his unlicensed electrician because I had the schematics for building all sorts of switches, conduits, and powered doors. So while he was busy renovating Skyhaven, I was going around in FreeCam, one of the few improvements 76 made to the active building, running conduits and stringing up lights. It was a cool moment and it felt like we were actually working together in a meaningful way. Not just helping each other clear dungeons a few seconds quicker and occasionally offering a revive when one of us got downed. He came by a shop I was building a few nights later and built some decorations, but those were items I didn't have unlocked and now I had them in my camp. The only other thing camp-related worth discussing are workshops. Workshops are a sort of stripped-down version of Fallout 4 settlements. These are fixed locations players can claim, which will then generate items the owner can come collect. These places range from junkyards on the tame end to nuclear power plants on the extreme end. The nuclear plant is a funny one because it generates 3 fusion cores every 20 minutes, which for power armor users is a very big deal and will trivialize powering a suit. The catch is that workshops are a free PvP zone. Any player can come in and challenge the current owner for the current spot, and that triggers a PvP scenario. In reality, I almost never saw players fighting for workshops, mostly because if you're a Fallout First member, you can claim a workshop on your private server for free and not have to worry about another player coming in to challenge you. And that's exactly what I did when I needed fusion cores for my power armor. I claimed it, and then I just went off and did some other resource farming, and every 20 minutes I'd come and collect my 3 fusion cores. Every once in a while, the workshop might get attacked by NPCs, and you gotta go defend it, but this is actually kinda nice because these are considered events, so you'll be rewarded with items and sometimes even schematics. So this is less of a chore and more of an added bonus. You can also build inside the workshop as though it was your camp, which allows you to install defenses. Unfortunately, anything you build in it will be lost once you lose the workshop or log off, and as far as I can tell, you don't get refunded for the materials you spent. You can also fast travel to any workshop you own for free, something you'll likely be using quite a bit when it comes time to defend your workshop from a pack of feral dogs. And that's really it for camps. I feel like they are perhaps the biggest missed opportunity in 76 because it was one of the only original mechanics that could have helped 76 stand out in the crowded live service space. Maybe it's my Rust 2.0 impressions kicking in again, but I feel like if the game had been entirely built around the camp system, with almost every aspect of the game feeding back into it, 76 really could have been something special. Just going into designing a game like this with that mindset would open up so many avenues for unique mechanics that could reward players for getting creative and make camps an extension of the player's progression. Alright, it's time we tackle the Raiders part of the main quest.
Hey, you down there! Don't be scared. I'm not a ghost. I'm talking to you through the PA system. Hey, you came because you heard me on the radio, right? Only I don't have the plans. It didn't seem important at the time. Ugh, I'm kicking myself for not taking the schematic when I found it. Whatever your name is. The world, and we're all fucked! I love this thing. So I was just gonna kill you and take your stuff when you came back? Look, I'm what you people would call a raider. Killing, stealing, and cheating is kind of my shtick. Hey, come see me at the top of the world when you get the chance. I've got something for ya, and I pinky swear I won't kill ya. I ain't put him there. You know, I keep meaning to find a maid service, but who has the time, right? Before you ask, I don't know. I wasn't there. Who knows what goes through their dopey responder brains? Can you imagine going through life 100% chem-free?
Sorry to just dump that dialogue on you like that, but now you can get a sense of how we felt when the game ambushed us with Rose. Annoying voice acting and unnecessarily quippy dialogue weren't the only things that made me want to turn this discount Tiny Tina into scrap lead for some ammunition. It was also the fact that this whole thing was an unnecessary diversion and the game wasn't shy about letting us know it. After our first dialogue encounter with Rose, we found the Overseer's holotape up there, and all she had to say was that Rose was a sociopath who needed her mouth washed out with soap. That's it. That's all our boss could tolerate of this character before she fucked off in search of the missile silos. So we're meant to push on where our leader couldn't be bothered for even a couple of minutes. Rose wastes no time dumping something into her quest journals, almost as though she understands we are pretty much held hostage by the voices in our heads that keep dumping quest markers on our maps. She gives us zero reason to actually work with her. Not even a bush beating session where she implies she understands we might be looking for Hank Madigan, which, spoiler alert, she's keeping his rotten corpse in a cage right next to her. Turns out this is likely the product of this questline being playable out of order. I didn't even know this was a thing until I started writing this section. The last faction we end up interacting with in this questline is the Enclave, and apparently you can just go into their bunker and jump the gun on the whole questline. You're eventually going to run into a roadblock that's going to force you to go one chapter back and deal with the Brotherhood of Steel, which hits its own roadblock that makes you go back to do the Free States, which makes you go back to Rose anyways. But on the off chance you run into those factions early, the game sorta tries to account for that, even if it's a clumsy attempt that comes across as a bunch of doctor's offices telling you need a different doctor's referral before they will see you. I also find it weird that they took the time to try to address this because originally the world wasn't level scaled. So really, what were the odds a level 1 player was going to stumble upon White Springs Bunker near the endgame zones filled with enemies that will one-shot them? So Rose's introduction had to be written as though she's unaware of what we're looking for because there's a chance we really might not be looking for Madigan. But this still doesn't answer why we'd be working for her. The responders part was pretty solid with giving us justifications for why we'd be doing most of what we'd been doing. The latter parts of the main story kind of just assumes we're committed by that point, and since those factions go back to directly dealing with the Scorched anyways, it's much easier for it to justify itself. Rose's sideshow has nothing to do with the Scorched. In fact, it's all about helping Rose lure the raiders back into the region so she can lead the gangs again. So while every other leg of this questline is about trying to save Appalachia from a terrible existential threat, this part is about bringing one back in the form of a faction of thieves, trappers, junkies, cannibals, and people who feel guilty about associating with the other 4 sub-factions. Lucky for us, it's that last sub-faction that comes back. This isn't even Rose trying to pull one over on us by hiding her true intentions. She's entirely transparent about this pretty early on. Granted, she has us repair the radio tower before revealing everything, but it's pretty damn obvious what she's about when there's raider paraphernalia all over top of the world and journals, holotapes, and terminals to spell it out even more. Even if she was playing us after the first quest to repair her radio, it's not like we couldn't just smash the thing after finding out its true purpose. So we fix the radio, find Madigan decorating Rose's suite, and then learn that the uplink was taken and stashed in the vault beneath the resort. If we want to get in there and grab the thing, I mean, at this point, I truly don't care, but quest objectives are quest objectives, we're gonna have to do some more work for Rose. Her second quest was straight up pointless busy work. She wants us to do some field research to determine which flavor of raider is the best. This will let her know what sort of management style she'll need to adopt when the raiders come flooding back into Appalachia, flocking to her hideout after hearing the radio broadcast. Now, you might be wondering, I thought the raiders were back already. Why are you doing all this stuff if the raiders are in the region again? Don't they even have their own hideout in the remnants of a crashed space station where they use their own radio equipment to carry out raider missions? To which I'm going to politely ask you to stop asking questions. The writers clearly never intended for Rose's plan to work, or at least not anytime soon, because they never intended to have human NPCs in the game. While most of the main quest had some friction with Wastelanders, Rose's chapter just completely falls apart, which is ironic considering the raiders get a big showing during the expansion and Rose even comes back as the opening act. We really only have 2 options left if we don't want to accept that this is a video game with some poorly thought out story DLC. Either we assume Rose is completely ignorant to the raiders coming back, which doesn't really explain the events that happened during Wastelanders, or we assume Rose is in denial that the raiders are giving her the cold shoulder and are just ignoring the top of the world. I kind of like that second option because at least it will give me some common ground with Meg, who I will be dealing with a lot during the Wastelanders DLC. so we soothe Rose's bruised ego by letting her boss us around so we can just get that damn uplink. This has us doing very productive things like drugging up and then killing a Yaoguai, and using explosive bait to kill some dogs, and trying to tame a Deathclaw, which didn't work for me the first time because the quest objective glitched out and scolded me for killing the Deathclaw, even though I was told to kill it.
Bam E on him.
Whoa! Hey, hold on! Didn't think you'd actually do it. We're talking about a Deathclaw here, for crying out loud. Well, you're there now. Either kill it or don't. I don't care.
Weird.
In the main
I
quest.
killed
What do you?
the Deathclaw Rose had me try to befriend. Oh. Did it not?
Did it not count?
Even though I got the dialogue that, like, she literally told me, okay, you can kill it now, I don't care. So then I killed it. Where's the other Deathclaws anyway? I don't even see
Look on the
anything.
map. It's a big square.
No. On my screen, it literally doesn't exist. I'm gonna relog. I think the quest is literally just bugged out for me now. I don't know what Rose got out of this, but she was finally ready to tell us how to break into the vault. Turns out she wanted to break into it too, but it's a bit of an involved process. Every boss of the 5 Raider sub-factions had a piece of a master key that, when combined, would open the vault. We just had to go track down each key, bring them back to Rose, and she'd do some robot magic to make it whole again. This quest retroactively makes the previous quest even more absurd because it seems like the whole reason that quest existed was to get us to learn about these dumb sub-factions that were wiped out anyways. Now we have another quest sending us out to the different hideouts for these sub-factions to learn of their ultimate fates. This could have just as easily been the quest to teach us about these sub-factions, just... Okay. I just need to stop. I need to try less negative and more positive. I finally stopped looting so aggressively during this quest line. There's one positive.
Was it worth getting everything?
Nope. Oh, were you waiting for me?
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus. We both got so sick of this questline that when we returned to it the following night, we just put the pedal to the metal and started speeding through things. We wouldn't really let off until after the main quest was done, so this meant I needed to stop slowing us down by neurotically picking up every toaster I came across, and instead adopt Pat's strategy of just looting the corpses of our fallen foes. This had the added benefit of getting me to focus on combat, which also helped make things go a little faster. We also learned how to loot all the bodies in an area, which was a recent quality of life update that helped speed things along even more.
Hey, so did you know that you can loot every corpse that's near you?
Oh,
Hold R on one of these corpses.
my God. How long have we been playing this?
You learn something new every day.
I really do want to apologize to those who have played this game and have been watching us ignore this feature for 13 nights now. On the upside, we really did appreciate learning about this feature after manually looting for so long. Now, you might be wondering how the hell we didn't know about it, seeing as it says it right there in the looting UI. I can't speak for Pat, but I actually tried using this once and it just didn't work, which is actually a pretty common occurrence because the system is a bit temperamental. When it didn't work, I figured it was just some feature that was either removed or I didn't have access to yet. This game is such a mess of redundant and discarded ideas that if something didn't make itself obvious to us, we just kind of ignored it until one of us read about it online. What other positive things happened? Pat got his vampire double barrel when we took a pit stop to do collision course. That was pretty neat.
What? No way.
What?
I got a shotgun that may prove interesting. So don't shoot him. Don't shoot him. Watch this. All right. Vampires short double barrel shotgun. Bullets explode on hit. Gain brief health regeneration when you hit an enemy.
Oh yeah, we both hit level 50 during this quest. Wait, doesn't that mean we should? Welcome to Fallout 76's mid-game. It was time for us to throw everything we knew about progression out the window. Redo our special allocations, our perk loadouts, and go through all of our equipment now that we won't be constantly swapping up gear. Mid-game is a lot like picking your first major in college after a couple of semesters of sampling classes and knocking out some mandatory liberal arts courses. At this point, you should have an idea of what you like and don't like, and also what's practical and what isn't. The best thing to do is to start deciding on what gun in your arsenal you feel like marrying. Ideally, it's at least a 2-star legendary. Then it's time to dump everything that isn't going to immediately work for that gun, because you really need to start picking up some defense boosting cards, and ideally some sort of passive abilities that will synergize with your build. I don't mean to imply this is exactly what I started doing at this point, but I also didn't really take the most optimal path through college either. This is just some wisdom I picked up after bumbling around for another 40 or so levels. At level 50, we unlocked the legendary perk cards, which range from bafflingly useless to literally disabling entire mechanics of the game, with some surprisingly useful sleepers in there too. I pretty much fell in love with the Master Infiltrator perk that lets you do both lockpicking and hacking while freeing up the perception and intelligence slots for more useful cards. So that's what I went with initially, and then I ranked it up to 4 stars, which let me instantly open any lock, irrespective of its level, and automatically unlock any level 1 and 2 terminals, while letting me attempt hacking level 3 terminals. So how legendary perk cards work is that, first, you have to unlock the slots. The first one, obviously unlocked at level 50, then it goes 75, 100, 150, 200, and 300. Once you equip a card, it's stuck in that slot unless you pay a perk coin to unequip it. Perk coins are awarded for breaking down perk cards, which are pretty easy to come by because the game will occasionally give you perk card packs when you level up, which gives you a random assortment of 5 cards. I almost never got anything useful from these packs, so I had plenty of coins when it came time to upgrade the Master Infiltrator to its carnal 4th rank. The weird thing with legendary perk cards, and I have no idea why this is the case, is that card slots are account specific. So if you get a character to level 300 and unlock all the slots, you can start a new level 1 character and have all those slots to immediately throw legendary cards into. The new characters won't have the leveled up cards, but some of these are so stupidly powerful that even their first rank cards are insane for a level 1 character. Allow me to introduce you to my second character, Moira Brown. I used her to get a sense of the solo experience in 76 and to capture footage for dialogue I missed during the main quest. More on that later. I started her off with the What Rads card, which heals accumulated radiation over time. Moira Brown could literally swim through irradiated water and not take a single rad because the passive rad healing was already that high with just a rank 1 card. Alright, say goodbye to Aqua Girl, this card does that and then some. This made her the perfect candidate for becoming a cannibal, because the only drawback to the human-eating lifestyle was soaking in tons of rads. And you know, I could see Moira's curiosity and unconventional methods leading her down the road to cannibalism. There's a few other cards in here I'd consider messing with. Ammo Factory ain't half bad if you're using a gun that burns through ammo quickly. There's a bunch of melee-specific cards in here, probably because melee in this game is so bad they needed to give the few lost souls committed to the playstyle something. I know I haven't mentioned melee, and well, that's because it's just bad. In a game with really poor hit registration, teleporting enemies with busted AI, and staggering seeming to be completely random, yeah, it felt like total garbage and I gave up on it very quickly. It exists. Moving on. The sleepers of this bunch are the special cards. What these do is give plus 1, 2, 3, and 5 extra points to the specific attribute depending on the rank of the card. This will free up those perk points to be put into other attributes. Very useful, but it has a bit of a quirk that always tripped me up. So you have to go in and unallocate the perk points being covered by the card you equipped, especially if the card pushes that attribute over the 15 point limit. Say you have luck at the maximum 15 and then equip a card that gives it another plus 2. Well, you're going to be wasting those 2 attribute points if you don't unallocate them from luck, because the game won't recognize attributes going past 15. I feel like this is a silly limitation because, especially for my main attributes where all my damage increasing cards would be, I could absolutely make use of it going to 20. What's the concern here? I stack too much agility and have too many action points? First off, this is just letting me specialize even more, something the game sorely lacks as it is. Second, we have legendary cards to disable entire mechanics. Don't even try telling me 20 strength would be crossing the line. In conjunction with the legendary cards, perks take on a whole new dimension once they are freed of their early game shackles, and I actually really started to like the system. I knew I was getting in deep when one night I was having trouble falling asleep, so I went on the 76 subreddit on my phone as opposed to watching dumb YouTube videos, and I started reading ideas for different character builds in 76. Yeah, this was pretty depraved behavior, but the builds I was reading about were even more depraved. Perks can synergize surprisingly well with all the other mechanics in the game, especially legendary effects on equipment. It offers an almost limitless number of permutations that can create character builds that will actually feel different from one another in very distinct ways. The bloodied builds are probably some of the most depraved. Like, literally, players deprive themselves of HP by blocking their health bars with rads. And then they combine a bunch of perks, mutations, and equipment that synergizes with stacking low health effects to make these the highest DPS builds right now. I didn't have the patience to do this myself, but I admire the dedication to the riskiest glass cannon builds I've ever seen in an online game. Another great character build I saw was someone stacking a bunch of seemingly random effects and then grabbing a minigun, not carrying any ammo for it, and just spooling the barrel up and running into enemies with the thing. The combination of perk cards, passive abilities, and something that might just be a bug with the engine causes the spinning barrel of the minigun to deal damage on contact with enemies. Honestly, the perks start to redeem the experience enough that, outside of exploring the game's map, they almost make the game worth playing, especially for someone like me who just loves making weird builds in RPGs. Even the RNG nature of legendary equipment almost gets redeemed here because I had build ideas pop up in my head a few times when I stumbled across a weird set of effects on a weapon and tried coming up with a way to use it. If you're a really degenerate min-maxer, perks and legendaries can keep you hooked just trying to find the perfect combination of perks, weapons, armor, and power armor. Unfortunately, the thrill from the perk system quickly gets lost when you realize all of these cool builds really can't redeem the awful content that you'll be interacting with. It wasn't long before Pat and I were back to the main quest grind, and with level 50 behind us, grinds were all that lay in store for us going forward. The line dividing the mid and end game is a lot harder to define than the line between early and mid. I'd say it's really up to the player. We could have made the mid game last 10 minutes if we wanted to, and that's because I'd say the end game starts once the player starts the grind. Actually, the grind is made of many smaller grinds, some of which need to be unlocked by finishing the major quest lines. I'd say, at the very least, a player needs to finish Wastelanders before they can really start the endgame grind because that opens up access to gold bullion. That's a crime against 76 players that will have to wait until later because we gotta bury this corpse of a main story. It's overstayed its welcome long enough. After collecting all the boss keys and putting down Rose's scorched boyfriend David, we handed them over to Rose, who had another objective for us. This sent us over to Charleston to track down the corpse of Rosalind, the dead woman whose personality Rose was based off of. David founded the Raiders in Appalachia and hooked up with Rosalind in more ways than one. Rosalind got captured by the responders in Charleston. David figured they killed her, so he got mad and blew up a dam which flooded Charleston, killing the responders there and his girlfriend. This was why Charleston looked like it got flooded instead of nuked, and also makes Madigan's plan seem even dumber in retrospect. This was a neat detail to learn because we hear about the Christmas flood at the responders' new HQ in Morgantown. Too bad all of this is easily missed in some offhand dialogue from Rose and a couple of notes. In my case, it was even easier for me to miss because Rose's dialogue started bugging out here. She had actually been having some issues the whole quest chain, but by the time we reached Charleston, she was just skipping lines or not even talking at all when she was supposed to. Not that I'm complaining much about missing riveting Rose dialogue. This is such a well-known issue too that some people have made guides for the best order to do the quest objectives to hopefully avoid this issue. Remember, no reloading previous saves in this game. If you missed the dialogue, tough shit. Also, don't expect to head to the wiki to find transcripts for all the dialogue in this game. This is a fandom wiki after all, not the UESP. You'll be lucky to find detailed descriptions for the quests. Turned out the trip to Charleston was a ruse. Rose just wanted to send us away so she could nab all the stuff in the vault before we did. I don't know what the writers were hoping I'd feel here. Anger? Betrayal? Disgust. All I got was apathy because she told us, or Pat, because this was one of the dialogues that just didn't fire for me, that she felt bad, and so she left us the uplink and the key to get into the vault. So we go there, and guess what? The uplink, which I still wasn't sure why we were even tracking it down, was broken. Rose actually helps here because, God forbid we hit an actual dead end and needed to do some exploration and investigating, and she just tells us about Abby's bunker in the mire. Or rather, she told Pat, once again, another dialogue that straight up didn't fire. Rose leaves an open invitation to return to Top of the World whenever we feel like it, and I want to say absolutely not, but I know what happens with Wastelanders. We'll be back, eventually. In the meantime, Pat and I got a nice hour or so hike over to the mire. Just keep running. Oh no. I guess this would be a great place to farm materials.
Okay, I gotta have this one.
Holy crap. Oh, we didn't even have to come here. It's just...
Yeah, we were just passing through.
That is a... that is a look.
and it's now yours. Perfect. Oh my god, I got you something. I got you a Christmas gift.
Oh.
You're gonna love it. It's so good I want to keep it for myself, but I'm not going to.
Vampire lever right. Oh. Oh, I am so glad I didn't put the fucking legendary on the lever rifle that I'm using right now. That is now just an objectively better upgrade. So we finally got to Abby's bunker. Abby was a member of the Free States, a group of doomsday preppers who had bunkers all over the mire and heating coils, a scorch detection system. I am a member of the College of Winterhold. In good standing. Another bunker.
The lives lost. My brother, my dad.
Oh, there's where they all are.
And yours truly, of course. Now whenever the Scorched are around, the detectors will pick them up and broadcast a message to your Pip-Boy. All that's left is the means to fight them off. If you haven't already, check my terminal to read about the traps we've created for the Scorch beasts. Hopefully, they're still in working order, and they're your best bet at making those flying freaks manageable. Beyond that, the only ones with any real means were the Brotherhood of Steel. Obviously, they didn't last, but they packed some serious firepower. They took their last stand somewhere in the bog at a place called Fort Defiance. But, thanks to their code names, I have no idea where it is. You'll want to start at Camp Venture, Eddie's old survival training center. I've also put everything I've got on the Brotherhood under an entry called Fort Defiance on my terminal. Good luck out there. And...
Sorry, Abby. Sorry to overshadow your moment there. I know that was the end of your quest line.
Just discovered something about the UI, so, you know. And that's it for the Free States. Now we're being sent to the Brotherhood of Steel's outpost. I'm sure some people are going to be annoyed seeing me speeding through the Free State section, especially since there's a few people who genuinely think that, had the Free States been fleshed out, they'd have been the game's first good faction. I'd say that's just the massive gaps in just about everything related to them being filled in by people's more creative imagination. I don't think this game can have a really good faction. Also, I think it'd be hard for the Free States to top the Enclave. Speaking of which, we still have the Brotherhood of Steel to work through before we get to talk about the Enclave. While the Brotherhood's part of the main quest wasn't nearly as painful as the Raiders, or as forgettable as the Free States, it still had plenty of pain and boredom to make it a not very enjoyable leg of the journey. If you want details on what they were doing here, or how they even existed, I'll once again encourage you to check out Patrician's video. To the credit of the writers, it's not the most insanely stupid explanation. That dishonor goes to the Brotherhood coming back in Steel Dawn. Some parts of their story are actually mildly interesting because we're back to a faction that was directly combating the Scorched. So their whole story, as roundabout as the main narrative was, getting us in contact with it, at least ties in cleanly with our principal antagonist and even ups the stakes quite a bit. The quests themselves go from a rather plain dungeon run to going through the Charleston Capitol building for a third time to ending on an actually pretty decent quest that had us hunting down and clearing out a Scorch Beast lair. The quest designers seemed to have some weird infatuation with the Capitol building in Charleston. It was a neat locale, but definitely not worth us being sent back to it 3 times during the course of the main story. The first time we were finding Rose's meat bag form. The second time was something for the Free States I skipped over because it just wasn't very interesting. But the third time was to have us stand in line at the DMV. Yes, the quest designers were so cavalier about wasting our time that they gave us 20 minutes of, "Doesn't the DMV suck?" Honestly, I wouldn't know. I've only been there twice because my state moved most of its services online over 10 years ago. Oh, but you see, this DMV has robots still running it 27 years after the war, and it's still a dysfunctional bureaucratic nightmare. Ah, funny. This is all so we can get a birth certificate and a fixed address so we can join the US military. Joining the military was another automated process, but this was a lot more professional than the DMV. If I actually trusted the writers, this would be the part where I'd be saying how this must be some clever attempt at world building, showing how joining the military in this setting is a million times easier than doing something mundane like going to the DMV. But I don't trust the writers, so I'm gonna assume that they just got bored with the bureaucratic joke and instead just wanted to make something that was part satire, part homage to military TV and film, and just part romanticizing military life. As promised, the final BOS quest was actually pretty good. It had us using our Pip-Boys to track down some transponders for these uplink things that led us to a mine where Paladin Tagrity and the remnants of her chapter tracked down the Scorch Beasts too. It was a pretty fun experience that had us wandering around the freshly introduced Cranberry Bog in the city of Watoga. It did a good job explaining that these Scorch Beasts were the source of the plague, that their lairs in the mines around Appalachia were breeding grounds for them, and that they bred way too fast for us to beat them conventionally. It even ended with a boss fight that, well, an attempt was made.
And it dies in a glitchy mess.
This quest wasn't without its issues for me, which was becoming a recurring theme. I don't know if the game just hated me or if it was because Pat was the team leader and I wasn't, but god damn. Margie's tape again. I literally just listened to this thing and just didn't accept it, so now I gotta sit here and listen to it again. Dialogue, quest objectives, and even quest markers were bugging out for me. When we got to the mine, my quest marker was still pointing me somewhere out in the bog. Remembering the lesson I learned with the holotape in the fire breather mine, I figured I'd best do my due diligence and head to that spot on the map to make sure I didn't miss an objective or something. Sure, the quest tracker was telling me to go into the mine, but the game also told me to kill that Deathclaw for Rose's quest and then told me I wasn't supposed to kill it. So I couldn't trust the quest objectives either. The map was the last thing I could trust in this game, and it was telling me to head back into the bog, so head back into the bog I did, and there was nothing there. So I learned a valuable lesson this quest. I can't trust anything in this game. By the time I got back to the mine, Pat had cleared pretty much the entire dungeon. Granted, he was going to do that anyways because my weapons and character build were already falling off, but yeah, I felt pretty bad here. We then got out of the mine after killing the boss, and someone had nuked the region because this is where the Scorch Beast Queen event is. So it was a race to fast travel out of there before the radiation took me because I didn't have a set of power armor on me. After looting everything Tagrity had on her, we were able to break into her office at their chapter's defunct HQ and learn that she wanted to use nukes against the Scorched. The BOS couldn't break into any of the silos. Hey, look at that, we're finally linking up with the Overseer's mission. But Senator Blackwell, who had a bunker in the Free States, might know how to unlock the nukes, seeing as he was part of the committee in charge of them. This kicked off a very brief investigation into a conspiracy that sent us back to Charleston again. Thankfully, we only had to go to the local newspaper's office, not the Capitol building. This led us to Blackwell's bunker, where we found out he'd been investigating a shadowy group in the government and the military who sent agents after him, and it's the Enclave. It's the Enclave. I won't lie, by the time we got to the Enclave's secret bunker, I was completely mentally checked out and pretty well spent. Pat and I had been dabbling in the public events and some of the endgame grind, and that stuff was such a breath of fresh air from the bland quest grind that the only thing getting me through this now was the notion that I'd get to do more of that once this was put to bed. As a result, a lot of the deeper story went right over my head by this point. That's a bit of a shame because this is definitely the most interesting section of the story where everything we'd been doing, except for Rose's shit, comes together to bring the story full circle. Had the quest and story been paced out even semi-competently, and most of the narrative wasn't buried in terminals that had become painful to sift through, I might have a bunch of positive things I'd be eager to talk about here. But none of that is the case, so the only positive things that I can say here is that it's brief, the rewards were decent, the Enclave opens up some interesting gameplay, and the novelty of saying that we were members of the Enclave as justification for all the terrible things we do to the Wastelanders NPCs was my favorite running joke.
Only death can prevent you from becoming a Scorch. Yes, give him the Emperor's Peace.
Where's Aldrich?
He's dead. Under the authority of Vault-76,
And the Enclave.
and the Enclave, I'm gonna have to ask you to leave. By force.
By order of the Enclave, you are required to vacate these premises immediately. Sir.
How are these here? We are with the Enclave. Have you been inoculated? I don't think he's been inoculated. He's not part of either.
Biologicals. He's got a weapon.
Oh no. Took him down nice and clean. Just how Vault-Tec taught us. You're talking to a sign there, Mr.
Sir.
Hunter?
We are the Enclave.
What-
State your business.
What are you doing here?
Sir, are you inoculated?
Not
Sir.
not out here.
Sir, are you inoculated? Oh, he's hostile. We are the Enclave. Esbern and Delphine. We're doing what we have to do to stop the Thalmor. It's 3 stealth boys. That was his contribution to the Enclave. Are you inoculated, sir? Sir! The Enclave, sponsored by Nuka-Cola. Why do you think our currency is caps, huh? We're here to press free radicals into service of the Enclave. Allow us an entry.
I see you have been slaughtering every Wastelander you've come in contact with. We approve of such methods. By our estimates, this will ensure Enclave control of New Virginia in 6 years, 8 months, and 23 days. Consider using the nukes to speed up the process.
A child!
That is some weird,
She doesn't really need it.
That's a weird trick they pulled to get her height so low. Can I adopt you? Why don't you come live at my house, child?
we can put you to work.
We have a place for you in the Enclave. Here, there's your toy.
You monster! Why would you steal her toy? You monster!
Delphine, what did you do?
This child is invulnerable.
Delphine,
It will come to understand the Enclave.
Delphine, you were never good with children. Let me handle this. Hello there, little girl. Have you ever heard of dragons? I saw one once, you know. It was all before my time, you see. The Enclave is unique in that it's actually still alive, technically. Because this was a Bethesda Vault-Tec vault, all the humans killed each other in their own factional conflicts. But not before they released the Scorched Plague, super mutants, and presumably many of the other things terrorizing Appalachia. All of this had been done to trick the missile silos into thinking the region was still in a state of war so that they'd open up and allow them access to the nukes. But they all dead, leaving the AI Modus to carry on.
Oh my god, did they program you to take forever to say this shit?
Modus just wants access to some Enclave satellites in orbit. All we gotta do is run through another bunker filled with robots. For our part, he gives us almost complete access to his bunker and some aid from orbit. If we wanted access to the command center in the bunker, which was where we'd get access to launching nukes, so yeah, we wanted in, then we'd have to become generals in the army. Sad to say, this was actually one of my favorite quests in this entire questline because the objective was simple and open-ended. Earn 10 commendations. Commendations can be earned from either completing Enclave-specific events or just killing legendary enemies. We went the legendary route, which gave us an excuse to abuse the Santas from Collision Course again, and then we just hunted down a few more to round out the 10. And that was it. We were now generals in the Enclave and had access to all sorts of perks, but most importantly, we got some sweet new threads. Hold on, do I have it on me already? Oh, wow, they just teleported into my inventory?
I think I got the dab.
All we had left to do was launch a nuke, and well, I might have been a bit unprepared for that difficulty spike. I didn't so much succeed here as I just won the game of attrition by abusing the forgiving death mechanics and relying on Pat to carry me. But we eventually launched the nuke, hitting the Scorch Beast Queen's lair. For this fight I was prepared, but unfortunately...
Ah, I see. A classic. You need 8 players because you can't do enough damage by yourself. Well, you see, it's about coming together.
That's exactly what the Overseer told us. Turns out Parthenax was unkillable this whole time.
We'll just have to go to a public session. I'm tempted to not even waste resources on this anymore. Because I can kind of do the math on this one. Why scale events to the difficulty? Like, this is just that event scaling difficulty problem all over again, where rather than making the event difficult based on the number of people participating, you just have flat difficulty. They just made it mathematically impossible for us to finish it.
We were gonna need some backup for this one. For the first time in 60 hours of playing this not MMO, Pat and I actually needed other players. Yeah, we're finally talking about multiplayer 2.5 hours into this video, what of it? If I haven't made it obvious already, this game's multiplayer is almost entirely superfluous. That's good news for Bethesda's primarily single-player audience, but terrible news for people looking for a pseudo-MMO, or people like me and Pat just looking to play this thing co-op. Remember when I was talking about how the game allowed me to get that vaccine with Pat, even though I didn't have the quest yet? Can you believe that was the most functional co-op was in this game? Yeah, for the rest of this playthrough, the co-op experience would in fact get worse. Wastelanders and both Brotherhood of Steel expansions would require us to play independently. While it would have been nice to get co-op features like sharing quests, you know, things that have existed in games like World of Warcraft for a couple decades now, 76 made us wish quests would just progress for all members of the party.
Oh, Jesus.
No, that's great. Now I have to go through this whole conversation.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't interact with her. I guess I have to come in here on my own.
Really?
Yup.
You don't have the quests?
Nope. I have the quest to talk to her, but it's not gonna let me talk to her. What's weird is, like, I'm in the house.
You heard the whole conversation.
Yeah, I heard the whole conversation. I have the quest active in my quest log right now. It's not even popping up on the top right hand of the screen.
Do you have to leave the team to fucking talk to her?
No,
I'm pretty sure.
I think I can go in there solo. So, this is part of the Wastelanders update, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So this has been close to 2 years since the game came out now, right?
Yeah.
And
yes.
I still can't participate in the quest in a group.
Yes.
In a multiplayer game.
in a game that is billed as co-op. What is there some kind of problem with that? Is there some kind of issue?
I'm telling you, this does not bode well. Hey, I know I was just here with that other lady, but I guess I wasn't paying attention or something. Could you go over all of that again? I want to blame this on the fact that quest NPCs exist in instanced areas, and so the game can only load the instance of the party leader, but that's actually total bullshit. First off, Rose. She existed in a loaded area separate to the exterior world. While my conversations with her were a bit jank, they still worked, and the game still let me have my own conversations with her while Pat was standing there right next to me talking to her too. Second, there's plenty of quest givers in the Wastelander settlements that players talk to for their daily quests. These are full conversations with dialogue options and everything, and not only are they out in the overworld, multiple players can talk to them at the same time. But for some reason, anything related to major quest chains post-launch just wouldn't let me talk to quest NPCs once I entered Pat's instance. It even got worse with the BOS DLCs when the level designers started playing with nested instanced interiors.
All right, let's try to do this one together and see if they fixed it.
Oh wait, I'm not even gonna be able to go in there. How do I?
Wait. Oh yeah, because it's a nested interior.
Yeah. I can't even go in there to help you. It will.
Maybe I need to go back into Fort Atlas.
Oh, maybe. Okay, yeah, it's gonna let me in now. And so
Not a good sign. All right, do you have an objective to collect documentation?
Nope.
Can you talk to her?
Nope.
They haven't fixed it?
Why would they? They
When did this update come out?
They fixed the game. It's done. Wastelanders was a success.
So at no point between April and November did somebody try to play Wastelanders as a co-op group, realize that it was fucking abysmal, and like try to improve that experience.
Evidently not. Well, I guess I'll.
Guess you'll go off to do it yourself.
Yeah. I can't even leave.
What? What do you mean you can't leave?
Because Fort Alice is instanced. So I have to fast travel out.
It's such an oversight that they didn't even anticipate that somebody would like get this far and then back out. Like you got trapped in here.
Wow. Bear in mind, this isn't even the only issue we were coming across trying to play co-op. We had problems with the server failing to synchronize our clients with things like weather, enemies, our positions, and even things like active public events.
Inflict 25 rads with melee attacks.
Fuck? Did you just get that? Did you just complete that event?
What event?
So I just got an event completed even though I'm not even in the right biome. How do events work? I'm assuming somebody completed it, but like, why was I a part of that event to begin with? And why did I get a reward even though I didn't even... Like, it's so far away, it might as well be in another time zone. What the fuck? I just got another fucking event. I'm almost positive the reason I kept getting kicked from servers when Pat wasn't was because our clients were falling out of sync, and because he was party leader, the game always ruled in his favor and just assumed I was the problem. Did it change the daily on me?
That'd be a bit weird.
What, the daily changing because the fucking server crashed?
Mm-hmm. The server didn't crash. You just lost connection.
Yeah. Wait, so vital connection, or vital equipment. Yeah, it did change for me. What? Okay, so if co-op is completely busted in this game, surely the bigger multiplayer functions are even worse, right? Surprisingly not. They're really janky, sure, and you can see the server buckling under the strain from time to time, but it's clear the social at a distance parts of the game got more attention than the intimate social experiences. Hey look, that's Bethesda saying people playing this don't have friends, not me. There's a public team system that's meant to encourage players to group up by offering gameplay incentives like bonuses to XP gain, stat buffs, sharing perk cards, that sort of stuff. The types of bonuses depend upon the type of team it is. Social, events, daily ops, role-playing, that sort of stuff. The longer you're on the same team with other players, the greater the bonus multiplier gets, encouraging players to stick to their team once they're on one. As I mentioned earlier, you also might want to team up just for the free fast traveling. There's also a private chat system for your team, so at least Bethesda has features from Halo 2 in here. The system mostly works as intended, but we did have some issues trying to do things like promote each other to party leader a couple of times. Oh yeah, I almost forgot to mention, this game has no text chat, or even a global chat. It's proximity voice chat and party voice chat only. In a game where everyone has a computer strapped to their wrists with radios built into them, we cannot remotely talk to one another. Don't bring this up on the subreddit, you might get made fun of. But what is there to really do with other players? Depends on the version we're talking about. Outside of busted co-op questing, currently you have public events, missile silos, daily ops, and expeditions, which are just reskin daily ops nobody actually plays. Unless you consider standing around silently emoting at each other to be content, well, that's it. So there used to be a lot more multiplayer content. Bethesda decided to kill off the Battle Royale mode rather than implement an anti-cheat system. They decided to cut the vault raids rather than fix their bugs. And they decided to make PvP opt-in and entirely unrewarding rather than making it balanced and giving it its own game modes. I only got into PvP twice when I accidentally had bounties placed on me when I picked locks in a workshop without realizing another player already owned them. After a few minutes, a high-level player would inevitably come over and smoke me to claim the 8-cap bounty. I want to make a bigger deal about PvP basically being removed from this game, maybe lament about the fact that the global PvP event to become the president of the Enclave was never implemented in-game, but I really don't have any faith that Bethesda could have made PvP work in this game. It's not like it was impossible, not at all. The concept of 76 was the perfect foundation for a PvP-focused game. I just don't think Bethesda had the design skills or the consumer goodwill to make something so experimental work. So it's best we just move on. The missile silos were probably the most fun thing Pat and I got to do together. Once you know what you're doing and are properly leveled and geared up, they are easy enough to be soloed. Still, playing with other players offers an enjoyable experience because there's opportunities for everyone to contribute. At various stages of the event, players need to do things like break through security systems, repair a reactor, disable a computer system, or defend the control center. There's opportunities for people with hacking skills to shut down some turrets or open doors or activate things like a decontamination chamber. There's also just a simple act of killing mobs, as these silos will continuously spawn infinite robots. Sure, these are just super basic dungeons or raids by the standards of World of Warcraft or Destiny, but they were still miles ahead of everything else 76 had going on. It's the only time the game really tries to claw its way out of mediocrity by forcing players to utilize their skills, gear, knowledge, and each other. It's mind-blowing missile silos were not used as a template for more content, but Bethesda probably saw most players never launched a nuke and just assumed that meant their players are anti-socials with no friends. Rather than making better social systems and creating more incentives to get those players sampling the best part of the game, they abandoned the one thing that made Pat and I sit up straight and start paying attention. It seems daily ops were meant to be their replacement. Daily ops are essentially randomized dungeons for teams of up to 4 players to run through. They have their own simple objectives like defending a control point or tracking down and killing a boss enemy. The game is able to pull from a list of dungeons and enemy factions, and then it can pull from a list of difficulty modifiers like making enemies do freezing damage or exploding on death. A single randomized daily op is generated every day with a 3-tier reward tied to it based on how fast players can clear it. What's weird about the reward system is that the time requirements do not change based on the number of players participating. So you can try soloing the thing if you're somehow that good, or you can get a full squad and basically guarantee the max reward on the first attempt. They're alright. It's very basic and completely lacking the imagination the missile silos had. Sure, they are randomized, so you can get thousands of different combinations of ops, but like anything else randomized in a game, eventually you'll notice it all feels very homogeneous and you'll be yearning for something handcrafted instead. You can also get some really unfun combinations. One op had us going up against communist agents that could do freezing damage, and it was not fun fighting super fast enemies that could slow you down, especially since I was using automatic weapons, so being slowed also slowed my fire rate. As well, there's no way to make your own daily ops even for fun. The only thing the system has to offer players is the single randomly generated op every day. I was gonna complain that this seemed like yet another abandoned idea by Bethesda because the system hadn't seen any expansion since the Locked and Loaded update almost 2 years ago, but the most recent Mutant Invasion update actually did expand it. Sure, it was just to add a few more pre-existing dungeons to the pool and a few new modifiers, but hey, that's still a sign of life. I think the reason daily ops were allowed to languish for so long was because expeditions were meant to, if not replace them, then at least substitute them. We'll talk more about the Pitt specifically in its section coming up, but for the sake of this discussion, we can still talk about the expeditions themselves. Players have to complete some mundane daily quests at the White Springs Resort in order to earn themselves an ultrasight battery. Once they acquire one, they can use that to fast travel to the Pit to complete one of the 2 expedition missions there. These are similar to daily ops minus the random factor because they're both entirely handcrafted. They're much longer, take place in bigger dungeons, and have a little story to accompany them. The problem is that all the things that make them stand out also make them worse and less replayable. The rewards tied to completing expeditions are weekly, but 98% of all PC players couldn't even be bothered to finish both expeditions at all. Now, I know I'm sounding a bit fickle here. I said the problem with daily ops is that the randomness gets boring, and now I'm complaining about the handcrafted daily ops. The problem is that I just wanted more missile silos. Once again, look at what Destiny is doing. The reason people love raids is because those are usually thoughtfully designed experiences that really test what endgame players are capable of. Bungie then layers optional randomized difficulty modifiers on top of them to create that replayability for these super hardcore players. They also have Nightfalls, which are really just better designed daily ops, but that's all I remember of Destiny. It's been a while since I've played. Daily ops and expeditions are missing the appeal of this co-op game mode design. It's not like 76's mechanics can't facilitate that sort of experience because it does exist in the missile silos and a handful of events. I think the biggest problem is that Bethesda doesn't seem to want to make content that would only appeal to endgame players. I get it. The game doesn't have enough players, and making content catered towards the existing player base might not pull in a new, wider audience. But the nostalgia baiting with the Pit clearly didn't work, so maybe it's time to focus on what you got, and maybe that will create good word of mouth, and that will get people interested instead. The only other multiplayer content of substance worth discussing are the events. Next to exploring the world of Appalachia, public events are probably the most popular thing players do in this game. While I'm sure there are people out there playing them for their own sake, most are just grinding these for the rewards. There's different types of events in this game, but they all broadly fall into two categories: events and public events. Regular events are the ones like Collision Course, which I mentioned earlier, an activity anyone can trigger by just walking into an area. The rewards for these events kind of make them not worth bothering with. They're really just there to act as some flavor. Instead, I want to focus on the public events. These will randomly spawn every 20 minutes and will notify players with a text box. Players can then check the world map to join the event or see the types of rewards the event gives. Not all events are created equal, especially when it comes to rewards, so don't be surprised if you join an event that doesn't reward something like Legendary Cores and find nobody else joins it. Events are where 76 can feel the most gamey. I don't mean that as an insult. I'm not one of those players complaining about my immersion insisting every game needs to be bound by real-world logic, but 76's gamey aspects can start to seep into inappropriate areas. It seems silly that a bunch of items will magically teleport into my inventory after finishing a quest, or that quests pop up in my journal insisting I do something very specific that no person would ever consider doing without being directly told. In those instances, a more appropriate design would be like having us find containers with the rewards, or notes telling us to do something to start a quest. You know, things Bethesda had been doing in, Skyrim. Still, I don't mind the gamey aspect of public events, partially because I can just not engage with public events. I mean, I can't if I want to do the endgame progression, but you know. But also because it does make the events more fun. The 76 would definitely be a more bland game without them. I mean, they could have committed to a more grounded theme for the game that helped reinforce the survival aspect of 76, and worked better with the setting of West Virginia in order to help 76 stand out in the live service field. But with all of that being abandoned, yeah, I guess they might as well just make some silly fun events. If this was one of my proper deconstructed videos, we'd be dissecting each event right about now, but we don't have time for that, so we're gonna have to settle on this arbitrary tier list I threw together instead. Based off of what I've been saying so far, the top of this list really shouldn't come as a surprise. In short, these are all events that require players to actually work together to complete successfully and maximize the rewards. Some of them, like Radiation Rumble, even have different tasks and unofficial roles players can elect into in order to see the event successful. It also helps that Radiation Rumble showers players in legendary weapons and XP. It's basically a bonus mode that could put players ahead of their grind by a full day or two. Eviction Notice was the same deal, but also great because for the first time in a Bethesda Fallout game, I had fun fighting the Greenskins. I also really enjoyed the world boss events like the Scorch Beast Queen and Earl. These are triggered by a player dropping a nuke on a specific spot of the map. Pat and I only triggered a global boss once with our nukes. We had more pressing targets that were calling for a nuking. But it was a really nice feeling seeing all these players kitted out in their best gear showing up to help kill a boss we summoned ourselves. It was the only time I felt a genuine connection with the randos in a server. These boss events, especially Earl and the Sheep Squatch, require players to come prepared, pay attention, and pull their own weight. Outside of the missile silos, these were my favorite moments in the game, and the fact that they were the reward for completing the missile silos only made them better. No snark or glaring issues I need to point out here, they're just really solid events I wish the game had more of at this point. The Sheep Squatch event got knocked down a bit because it can be a pain depending on how good the randos were, and the event does have a mechanic that could insta-kill players, but I'd still take it over most of the events in the game. Moonshine Jamboree and Project Paradise were another couple that we'd jump on whenever they popped up. Moonshine Jamboree was mostly for the reputation with the Raider faction, but it was still a fun shooting gallery that was great for testing out character builds. Project Paradise had a bit of a learning curve to it, which means most players don't actually know how to play it correctly, but it was once again another fun shooting gallery event against a lot of enemies you don't normally fight out in the world too often. The C tiers were usually ones that we'd show up mostly for the rewards. Guided Meditation was particularly dull, but it had a high chance of spawning legendary enemies, so, you know, best to attend. Spin the Wheel was the Nuka World on Tour event, which was probably the peak of gamey nonsense events, but once again, good rewards. And if the wheel spun well, you could get some fun moments fighting super mutant behemoths or something. The D tiers were the ones we'd reluctantly join depending on what else we were doing. Feed the People was one of the most boring events we'd end up doing the most because it was guaranteed rewards. It was also a good chance to go to the bathroom because a solo player could handle this event. If there were more than 3 of us there, I'd literally just sit in a corner and pull out my phone for most of the thing. It is a low-level event, so it is what it is, I guess. Would be nice if events could scale based on player performance. Then there were the F tiers. When 76 has a bad event, it's bad. Free Range, One Violent Night, and Swarm of Suitors are all point defense events. Where Free Range has you following a slow-moving pack of Brahmin, and One Violent Night requires players to pick up instruments to make noise to attract the next wave of enemies, Swarm of Suitors just has you standing on a tiny, indefensible island fighting off waves of Mirelurks, making it the worst event I encountered. There's a few I didn't get to play, and I really can't justify going back and playing them now because, for starters, they're random. I think I saw Jailbreak spawn only once or twice while we were playing. So if I want to go play a specific event, I'm going to just be sitting around twiddling my thumbs until the server finally decides to spawn it. On top of that, Mutant Invasion adds mutation modifiers to certain events. These make the events harder to complete, which would be fine if most players were doing these for fun, but most people are grinding these for their rewards. So if they see a hard version of an event pop up, they just skip it and wait for the next one that will let them knock it out in a few minutes hassle-free. I'm sorry, but I'm not going to wait around for 4 hours only for a mutated version of Test Your Metal to pop up. Oh, wow.
Well, that was something.
With Parthenax dead, Delphine and Esbern were feeling a bit aimless. Following the advice of their dare officer, they went and joined the Pioneer Scouts to avoid a life of drugs, crime, and debauchery idleness often brings. I hope it's the dude again. Yes! Oh, nice. It's repeating itself, too. I'm hyped. What about you? I'm ready, coach. Oh. Please tell me you're hearing this.
Yeah. Where's your Pioneer Scout uniform?
Oh, my bad. I'm ready, coach. Yeah. I want this dude to be my personal trainer. Wild Appalachia was the first major content update for 76 after its launch, and after playing the thing, I can see why Bethesda was considered a lolcow for so long. Imagine this. The game studio you work at is in the news just about every week for some new controversy related to the game you just crunched to release. You're all getting angry messages and death threats from players who paid full price for a game that's barely functioning. Constant server wipes keep deleting player progress. Cheats, exploits, and item duplication methods are rampant. All the bread tubers and parasocial Twitch streamers are playing your game for a quick laugh and an even quicker buck, and your job is to write things like this for 8 hours a day for the first major content update that's meant to save the company.
Judge would rather study dinosaurs than mammals because they're big and scary, but mammals can get big and scary too, and they're still around. What is the largest living mammal?
Mice have been sneaking into your garden and nibbling on all your plants. It's time to take action. What kind of weapon was made for just such an occasion?
Hannah is driving a train from White Spring to Sunnitop at 50 miles per hour, and Samuel from Sutton to Morgantown at 60 miles per hour. If they both leave at noon, when will they collide in a fiery crash?
The Wild Appalachia update was a band-aid meant to treat a decapitation. It came out 4 months after the game initially released, so if you didn't hear about it, well, that's because 76 had already been mostly forgotten by that point. But the players sticking it out hadn't forgotten, and for their loyalty, they got an update that was mostly side content and gameplay challenges. There were a few gems introduced with it, like the Sheep Squash event and the Fixer auto rifle, but for the most part, this is a largely forgotten piece of 76 content. Pat and I were committed to the plan of going through all the content though, and this was content. The nice thing was that completing a few of these Pioneer Scout challenges would give us access to bigger backpacks. We started the game with backpacks already equipped, and it turns out those are only boosting our carry capacity 5 pounds. The ones we were working towards would give us a 60-pound bump, so yeah, definitely worth the effort. These challenges were mostly forgettable. The entertainment for us was just getting to screw around again, making jokes and exploring some obscure parts of the map. Some of these locations we'd already seen before and wondered what their deal was. Well, now we knew. They were parts to some Pioneer Scout challenges. There are 24 badges total players can collect, and these involve doing a bunch of challenges related to their fields, such as hacking, medicine, archaeology, and being a trained otaku. Each one also requires passing a multiple choice exam, which is where I got those questions from. Pat and I had to do 3 in order to get the upgraded backpacks, so we settled on archery, athletics, and swimming. This sort of content does not really appeal to me as a player. I was never big into collecting things or doing challenges or completing achievements, so aside from the backpack and all the funny moments getting it entailed, I was itching to get to the real update. Nuclear winter. Haha, just kidding. Like I've been saying, almost nothing about this update exists anymore save for the now useless vaults those game modes introduced. Fallout 76 has a ton of liminal spaces, but these vaults were by far the most strange. So when are we gonna get the story to this place? I still haven't found like any hollow journals or...
Don't worry, they're all packed into a single room.
If we realize it's more convenient that way. That way you don't miss the story.
What if we made it a vault dungeon themed around plants? Didn't that already exist? What, you saying it couldn't happen again?
Alright, what story are we gonna tell with it? What?
What? Story?
Yeah, you know, like... It's the one in Fallout New Vegas is like, you know, you had the bounty hunter in there, and they were doing things by pumping the place with chemicals to, you know... What's the story here?
I didn't play Fallout New Vegas. Not even story, just like, you know, don't have the terminal go. Everything's fine. There's no need to ever have a restart. Oh, this is a terminal named after a guy here. Personal logs. And why are there fucking 10?
You were right.
This is not how you do this. Okay, so you ready for some of the story?
Oh.
I'm about to unload some of the plot onto you.
Oh.
You better sit down, okay? Some Hicks showed up and killed all the vault dwellers and then fucked with the Gek, and this is the result.
Okay, I'm seated. You can continue telling me the story.
No, that is the story. The vault dwellers all got killed by some, like, 3 Hicks, who fucked with the Gek. And now the vault's like this.
Alright, we can leave now. Alright, that's enough screwing around. Let's talk about the big one, the Wastelanders update, the beginning of 76's redemption arc. First, a bit of context. Wastelanders came out in April of 2020. That's 17 months after the game launched. Wild Appalachia, like I said, came out 4 months after the game released, and Nuclear Winter came out 3 months after that. Players had to endure a 10-month content drought with nothing but some minor patches to hold them over until Wastelanders. It's safe to say there was a lot riding on Wastelanders. It needed to be a banger. Looking at the patch notes, it's clear they put in the work, and it does help explain the gap in content releases. So, how did they do? I know I've spoiled the mic drop that this update is not as good as people have hyped it up to be, but I need to show you why. If there's one part of Patrician's video you're going to watch, please make it his Wastelanders section. Not only did he do the faction I didn't get to play through, he also goes into details I'm going to be glossing over because I need all the runtime I can get to give you the full Raiders side of the story. The questline starts with us meeting up with the Overseer. Seeing as we're higher than level 20 now, she recognizes our existence and tasks us with ending the Scorched Plague. The thing is, we thought we'd already ended the Scorched Plague by dropping a nuke on the Scorched Queen and killing her in that global event. That was literally the entire point of the last leg of the main story. So already we have the writers retconning the original ending. I guess it's to be expected. They definitely didn't expect to be doing an update that brought human NPCs back, so some compromises had to be made, I guess? I don't know why they did this. The Scorched plot was already settled. Is this meant to explain why the Scorched are still in the game? Well, spoilers, but they're going to continue to exist after Wastelanders has us get everyone inoculated anyways, so what the fuck? The premise of Wastelanders is that two groups have returned to Appalachia, settlers and raiders. The settlers have established their settlement of Foundation at Spruce Knob, while the raiders set up shop at a crashed space station in the crater. The Overseer wants us to get both factions fully inoculated against the Scorched Plague using the vaccine the responders developed that we got ourselves during the main quest. How we are supposed to manage that and what we are supposed to do about all the other human inhabitants of Appalachia, like the Mothman cultists, the Blood Eagles, and all the other random settlers and raiders roaming the region is left completely unanswered. Foundation's leader recognized pretty much immediately the Scorched Plague was a problem and was eager to accept our help. Meg, the raider leader, was going to be more resistant for a time.
Just some bullshit the responders made up to sucker the weak out of their supplies. Didn't fall for it then. Sure as shit ain't falling for it now.
Then why are you back? Why are you back? Why did you come back? There's a fucking plague. And you're like, I'm an anti-vaxxer. Leave then. What the fuck is this?
In order to even get an audience with Meg, we needed to trick her into a meeting because I don't actually know why. I walked right up to her after getting the quest, and none of the raiders shot at me or anything, and she already knew who I was somehow. But I wasn't allowed to bring up the Scorched Plague or the vaccine. This meant we were gonna have to listen to the quest marker and talk to Rose again.
Well, well, look who it is. I was wondering when you'd show up. Not that I'm a stalker or anything. I totally saw you heading my way.
More hilarious, quirky Rose dialogue aside, her part is actually pretty brief because she doesn't require us to do a bunch of annoying busy work. She just needs us to collect some stuff related to her old BF so she can spoof his voice to broadcast it to Meg to finally get her to show up at top of the world. Meg puts up a very convincing front about how she doesn't believe in the plague or the inoculation and that her plan is just to kill the Scorched dead. At this point, it would have been nice if we could have brought up the fact that the BOS couldn't be the Scorched with their trained professional soldiers and high-tech military equipment, and even we couldn't kill them with nukes. But the story has to be written with the assumption that the players were successfully sidetracked from the main quest. As well, the game has a little side mission to send us on to find out that, yep, the raiders can't kill the Scorched by themselves either. Once we tell Meg that her team of experts got wiped out to the man, which she doesn't even ask for proof of, she just takes our word for it because her guy was running late, she does a complete 180 and agrees to convince all these crazy quirky raiders in her gang to get the inoculation. There was just one tiny problem. We still didn't have a way of producing the vaccine in bulk to give to these people. The devices we used to inoculate ourselves were in mutant-infested Charleston, and it would take way too long to do it that way anyways. The Overseer decides we're going to do what the Solarians did with the Krogan and spike the drinking supply. Actually, we're going to use a Nuka-Cola plant to mix the cure that's in our blood now to make a vaccine soda. How do we know a soda bottling facility would have the high-tech medical equipment needed to make this work? It's just there, okay? Just trust the Overseer. This was the point where Pat and I had to split up. I tried joining his instance of the Nuka-Cola plant, and yeah, the game was getting really annoyed we still hadn't picked up on its hints that this was now a single-player experience.
What?
What? Does she know? Do you know something I don't know?
Let the ghouls attack her. Stop shooting him.
Oh, I got mutated.
Ghouls. The ghouls are ignoring her.
Alright. I guess I'm doing it solo then. After synthesizing the cure and distributing the 12 whole bottles of Nuka-Cola to Foundation and Crater, the Overseer declared mission accomplished. We did it. Appalachia had been saved. This allowed us to kick off the real quest for this DLC. The ultimate heist. We were going to break into a vault and steal the entire pre-war US Treasury's supply of gold bullion so we could reestablish the gold standard in Appalachia and start rebuilding the government by reestablishing trade and... Okay, who wrote this? I thought like the punchline would be, yeah, the gold is worthless. Like it's all worthless, but like, you know, the vault is probably going to have some important like technology, or we could use the vault as like a new base of operations or something because it's been untouched and all that. And, you know, if they put money there, like there's probably a bunch of... No. We're going to use the gold to recreate the gold standard so that we can trade and establish a currency Excuse me, what the fuck have I been collecting? I have like 10,000 caps. Is that not currency?
No.
What about and barter and stuff like that? We have like all these different. Is this really like? This is the plan?
Yeah, this is our plan. We're rebuilding the gold standard.
What happened to the Scorched and all of that?
No, we took care of that. We inoculated 12 people.
We're done with that now, right? That's done and over.
It's resolved.
It's resolved. Yeah, we finished the mission. We made the Nuka-Cola. It's done now. Now we have to reestablish the gold standard. Oh my god, is this real?
What is there some kind of problem here?
Yes, there is something wrong here. Actually.
Hey, remember when the main argument against the NCR was that they were recreating a government that failed?
Well, hold on. This is only 20-something years after the bombs dropped. You know, we need about 200 or so years to work out all the ways to, you know, figure out that rebuilding the ways of the olds is not going to work. So we can't have that lesson yet.
Right. Sorry, I'm an idiot.
I might have skipped a bit here, but the gist is that ever since Pat and I started this playthrough, we'd been hearing rumors of some hidden treasure in Appalachia. After doing some snooping in Vault-Tec University with the Overseer, we learned about Vault 79 with its reserve of gold. That's what spawned the insanity of this plan. This is where we got to decide what faction we were going to work with to break into the vault. Pat went with the Settlers, which left me with my favorite, Meg and her Raiders. Naturally, she was on board with the plan to loot a vault full of gold, which makes sense. She doesn't even seem to understand what it means to be a raider, let alone grasp the concept that gold is worthless in a post-apocalyptic setting. This kicked off a series of recruitment missions where I had to assemble a crack pipe team of misfits to pull off the ultimate heist. First, we needed a way to get through the vault door. Crater had a master explosives expert, but he ran off, so I had to go track him down. This had me running into Weasel, an expert tracker who was looking for our boy Lou as well.
Now, I am with Meg and her gang. They like me, but when they found out why I could not talk, they programmed this thing so I could only say my name is Weasel. That way, people know I was a rat. The scientist was working on a device to let animals talk. Fisher made it work for me and improvised. Made it work better, mostly. The vocals, box cable. Word list was not complete. For example, there are no bad words. I have been trying to say bad words this whole time, but they do not come out. If I try, I can say them in other ways. Poop. Fornicate. Hot underground place.
Don't worry, Weasel disappears after this quest, which somehow makes her inclusion here even more obnoxious. It turned out Luke came to this mine in order to try to kill himself. Yeah, Bethesda's gonna try navigating that topic after giving us Weasel. I'm gonna go and skip ahead a bit because their nonchalant approach to this topic really came off the wrong way here, and I'm not looking to linger on it. After coming to an agreement with our demo expert Lou, I had to secure the dynamic duo of Gale and Rara. Gale was a super mutant who I was told would be a big help if we had to do any fighting, and Rara was great at circumventing security systems by crawling through vents. Gale was, well...
You need help? No! Gale needs help! Gale don't like your attitude. Gale don't like your face. They say calm down, stop yelling, don't throw things, stop breaking arm, but no one listens. No one helps. One say maybe Gale is just hungry, so they give meat. Gale no want meat, not now. Not while Gale need help. It make Gale want to scream. Oh!
In a game with Rose, she wasn't the worst character I'd come in contact with. Rara, though.
Bun is my favorite toy. He's a bun, and he goes hop, 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 hop. I love him so much. I don't like you. I was having fun, and I thought you'd have fun too. You're nothing like Gale. Gale's the best. She lets me play with things. You're a stinky buttface! You're so mean! Fine, I hate you! I'm telling Gale when we get back!
Duct rat. It's a local slang for the poor kids who grow up in the station. When they're small, they tend to play in the ventilation ducts where adults can't get to them. Those are just the ones we know about. More just disappear. Maybe they get sucked into space. Maybe they fall into the protein vats the keepers run.
This quest was interesting because I was allowed to be a total asshole to Rara, and she really couldn't do anything about it because she had to progress the quest forward. I wasn't sure why, in a story where I couldn't bring up obvious things like how the gold standard wouldn't work or that nukes could absolutely solve the Scorched Plague, that I was being allowed to bully this little girl for no reason. I wasn't sure what the catch was going to be, but you can bet I seized on the opportunity to express how I was really feeling for the first time in this quest line. I mean, I'm supposed to be a raider after all. Being a dick is kind of what they're known for. It turns out these choices have consequences in the pettiest and saddest way possible. So because Rara is able to circumvent security systems with her duct rat skills, there would occasionally be optional doors she'd be able to unlock for me so I could loot a room. Because I was mean to her during this quest, she refused to do it. Not only that, during the heist, she tried taunting me with the fact that she wasn't going to let me into a room that I could look and see that there was nothing of value inside anyways. All my fellow partners in crime also joined in on chastising me for having been mean to Rara.
I see some pretty good stuff in that room, but I'd really only do that for my best friends, and you're only an okay friend. Sorry.
Kid's got you there. Oh, I'm starting to like her style.
Told you. Should have been gooder to Rara.
This is the Raider storyline slapping me on the wrist for picking its own dialogue options to be mean. You see what I meant earlier about the writing coming across as resentful and condescending? After getting the dynamic duo on board, all that was left to do was get our security expert, Meg's ex-boyfriend. Johnny is a man of many fronts. He's a con artist. I actually started to like him after a while because he was the only character in this faction that wasn't painfully overt with his shtick.
So attractive one day, not attractive the next.
Have you come across this?
Yes, I am familiar with this syndrome. She's a two-face.
Too bad his recruitment quest was completely broken, so he wanted my help busting an old business partner of his out of a slaver stronghold. This involved going incognito and pretending to be Johnny's slave that he was entering into a gladiatorial arena. After slipping past the guards posing as a slave, I realized I was in my home build and I was about to be doing a bunch of fighting in an arena. On a hunch, I wondered, could I just leave on my own and go switch to my combat build real fast? Turns out, yes, I could. Charisma 8+? Oh no, I'm in my fucking home build right now. Can I actually do this? No way. No fucking shot. I can just leave? Back in my proper build, I was ready to do a few rounds in the arena. There was a lot of ambition on display here. We had all sorts of options for how to rig the fights in my favor, and there were fighters I'd have to beat that I could get to know and use skill checks to sabotage. But the entire sequence broke after the second fight after I found out there was literally no consequence for dying in the arena because I just respawned still in the fight. And they're just gonna trust me to what? Why did it just spawn like 50 raiders on me? What the fuck? How does that one work? What? What? What the fuck is going on? I guess this is plan B. Oh, this is definitely bugged. Good thing we're doing this fight in here because me dying in here doesn't matter. I just literally respawn right here. This might be the worst quest I've done in this game so far. Yeah, I guess our cover got blown and nothing told me that it got blown. And then it just spawned every single raider that's in this place on me at once in the arena, where dying literally just makes me respawn right where I was standing. And now, yeah, literally the objective was like, wait for the results of the fight, and then, bam. I guess that was the results. After that disaster, Johnny and I blasted our way to his old business partner, who Johnny immediately snuffed out because, yeah, it turned out this wasn't a rescue operation, it was an assassination. Okay. With that, we had everything in place for the heist. But then, betrayal. Lev, one of Meg's underlings, and a bunch of his buddies jumped Lou and stole the detonator for breaking into the vault. I mean, this dude is so good he's gonna blow open a vault door. Surely he could just find another detonator. Wouldn't he have 1,000,000 of these lying around anyways? Meg wasn't pleased to hear about this and named me her Grand Inquisitor, tasking me with finding out where Lev ran off to. This was going to involve a lot of talking to quirky, funny characters of Crater, and I could not be bothered. For a few caps, I got the bartender to just tell me who was connected to the plot, then I got my information and served justice my own way. Then I went to Lev's hideout, killed all his goons, and found out I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. Lev was the only genuine raider this faction had to offer. He knew the gold was bullshit. He knew Meg was a terrible leader, and he hated all the stupid, quirky characters like Gale and Rah-Rah that Meg kept recruiting. So he sold them out, made a deal with Foundation, and was going to make himself the new raider boss. This dude understood. He understood it all. But no, I was not allowed to side with him because he called the wonderful characters in Crater a bunch of freaks. This was the part that started to break me. I'd been tolerating this questline up until this point. The dumb characters, the superficial skill checks, oh yeah, none of them actually did anything, FYI. The lack of meaningful choices, the super buggy quests, and the inclusion of trap dialogue choices that the writer would use to chastise me for wanting to play like a raider and not like a Borderlands NPC. I was tolerating it all because I still couldn't believe that this was the DLC that convinced people this game was good now. This is what redeemed 76. This is what fixed it all. And then we got to the heist, and it all fell apart even more. After blasting through the front door, yeah, it's just that easy. I don't know why nobody thought to do that before. We were in. The crew immediately got themselves locked in the security room while I fought a bunch of robots solo, and that's when I realized dying here did not mean anything. I'd respawn at the front of the dungeon and I could just walk back to where I died, pick up whatever junk I'd dropped, and go right back to chiseling at the vault's defenses. So that's what I did. Not because I had to, not because I wanted the challenge, I just did it out of spite. Screw it, I'll keep my worthless stim packs. The goon squad then got themselves into a bit of a pickle with the security system in the other room. I don't know what that was because the dialogue started breaking, so I couldn't hear what the security system was saying. This was particularly troubling because this section was a fucking dialogue puzzle. I had to tell Gale what to say to the security system so that it would register as a member of the security team. Why have the super mutant who struggles to understand language do this section? Because Rah-Rah was a child and Johnny had some priors. So I had to tell Gale what to say in response to security messages I couldn't hear or read. So I just started picking options at random. I mean, what else was I gonna do? And of course that worked. It didn't even take long. We all hooked back up after they got through security and started laying waste to the robot defenses. Or rather, I did. They all just immediately got downed because NPC followers in this game are worse than useless. They won't even stimpack you if you go down. So I just kept throwing myself at the robot defenses, chipping away at them, letting myself die, and doing the run back for 30 seconds to continue the battle of attrition against the vault. We hit a really tough sentry bot that wasn't taking kindly to my passive-aggressive tactics, which did stump me for a bit until I found the safe room in the back of the arena where the devs put workbenches to make ammo and repair your gear, you know, just in case. This was also the cheese spot, so that was the end of the sentry bot gatekeeper. I probably could have just left the vault and went back to my camp real fast if I was actually in a bad situation supply-wise. I seriously doubt anything negative would have occurred as a result. We got to the end of the vault and found the feds who'd been holding down the fort for the past 27 years. Johnny tried to betray me, so I filled him with lead, convinced the feds the ghoul in their midst was going to turn feral just because the game allowed me to, then struck a deal with the feds in the vault where they'd safeguard all the gold there, and in exchange they'd let me exchange any gold I collected for some schematics and gear. The end. Oh yeah, and I also gave the raiders one last cucking by telling Meg that not only did I kill her ex in cold blood, I was also keeping the reward for myself and she could hike it back to Crater empty-handed, just like Lev would have done. There's no way anyone saying the game is good now played the raider side of this questline. As jaded and cynical as I may be, I really cannot imagine the person who would look at all of this and think, yeah, I see nothing wrong here. This was, without exaggeration, one of the lowest points I've ever had with a video game. I've never had a game inspire me to make my experience a little more challenging and annoying for myself just out of pure spite for the game. If we're talking Bethesda questlines, this is the lowest I've ever seen them sink to. The companions in Skyrim were better. I would know, I talked about them for almost an hour in my last video. Oh yeah, and they also forgot to give the Raiders side of the questline item rewards. Pat got a whole bunch of rewards for doing the Settler side, including a stealth suit. The only thing I got out of this was a little bit of gold bullion, some slight amount of Raider reputation, and access to the real endgame grind. Let's move on. There's still all the stuff at the Wayward. It's nowhere near as bad as what I had to do with the Raiders during the heist. It's frankly just kind of boring. It's another quest about breaking into a vault, which, why are they already recycling story premises in the same DLC? Was this supposed to be thematic? Was it to act as a little primer for the Vault 79 heist? Or did they really just run out of ideas that quickly? This questline exposes us to yet another cast of quirky characters.
Oh God. Polly? Whoa. You're not looking so great, darling.
Duchess, I'm not feeling great.
Friend, why don't you sit her down? Jug should do the trick.
This is real snug.
That's not gonna do it all.
Oh, Polly. This is all my fault.
Solomon, no. Don't you dare. This is not... Duchess, tell me you emptied this out.
Did I? You know, I'm 80%.
Duchess?
The most noteworthy part of this quest was the plot twist that the gang of raiders that had been harassing the bar were actually just a group of survivors trying to make ends meet, and their leader was, in fact, a fair and level-headed guy. But the player might not realize that until it's too late and they had wiped out the group. I'll give the writers credit for at least trying here and even giving us an option to settle the dispute between the raiders and the bar peacefully, but this quest really does set a misleading impression that all the content in Wastelanders would be this nuance, when it's obvious the Wayward just got extra attention because it's literally the first thing the player will come across when leaving Vault 76. They also insinuate the barkeeper had sex with a Scorched she domesticated, which was almost as awkward as the cutscene that followed that revelation, where she tries to convince us that maybe the Scorched can be saved. Maybe not all of them are dangerous. Ultimately, the problem with Wastelanders is that it simply doesn't improve the original game. Even comparing it to the low bar that is Fallout 3, nothing here can compare to that game's characters, world-building, plot, or the cohesion of all those things working together. Wastelanders is so shoddily constructed. It's obvious it was put together by Bethesda's B team under stressful circumstances in a short time frame, working within the constraints of a busted, poorly designed live service game. I really have to wonder if people praising this DLC, saying it turned the game around, even played it all the way through. If there's a new hit piece on why Fallout 3 is trash coming out every week, why isn't Wastelanders being dragged through the dirt too? I think it's just because nobody cares. Hardly anyone actually did play this all the way through. That bump in players when it came out, that was probably from people who heard the game had NPCs and skill checks now, signed on, confirmed, yep, they're there, and then quit the game never to return again. With Wastelanders done, Pat and I had pretty much full access to all of the endgame grinds. The BOS updates wouldn't introduce anything big to the grind, and the Pitt expeditions added stamps, which most players couldn't be bothered with because most of the rewards for collecting stamps were redundant anyways. 76 becomes a game of grinds in its endgame. I can't really begrudge it for that. This is pretty much the ultimate fate for any large-scale multiplayer game. The problem with 76's endgame grind, though, is that, for one, it's really pointless because there's nothing to do with the gear you grind for. Second, the grind is dragged out way too much because there's all sorts of arbitrary limits on what you can do each day. You will run out of stuff to do after a point each day because of these limits, and as far as I can tell, this is by careful design because it ensures most players will keep coming back day after day. Before we talk about what the grind looks like, we should talk about currencies. Not only is 76 a game of endless grinds, it's also a game of endless currencies. Technically speaking, there's close to 20 different currencies in the game depending on how we define currency, but many of them are either tied to events or very specific mechanics or have been phased out at this point. In reality, there's 7 currencies most players are going to care about: caps, gold bullion, treasury notes, scrip, legendary cores, stamps, and atoms. Some of them, like gold bullion and treasury notes, are closely related to one another, but they are still distinct and are acquired in different ways, so there's no substituting one for the other to make the grinds easier. Caps are still what people have known and loved since Fallout 1. This is your main monetary currency. You can use them for buying and selling items with NPC vendors, player shops, and directly with players themselves. You can only hold a maximum of 40k caps, and you can only earn up to 1400 caps per day from NPC vendors. These limitations are likely the result of Bethesda wanting to avoid an insane degree of inflation that would occur in this game due to a lack of money sinks. As a result of these limits and several other factors, this game has almost no player economy. There's automated kiosks players can put in their camps where other players can purchase items the owner has listed, but without any sort of inter-server trading system like an auction house, this really kneecaps what kiosks can do. Most players can't be bothered to interact with the system outside of throwing their extra chems and ammo into the vending machines, making going around checking out other players' kiosks a really tedious process, only eased somewhat by a vague overview from the players' camp icon on the map. There are items other players might be interested in, such as crafting schematics and legendary equipment, but shopping for those items by checking all the shops in a server and then hopping to another server is obviously entirely impractical. Gold bullion can be exchanged with the settlers, raiders, and feds for a ton of unique weapons, armor upgrades, and just all kinds of things. It's arguably the most valuable currency and the thing most players spend their time focusing on. Treasury notes can be exchanged at a gold press machine for bullion at a rate of 1 note for 10 bullion. You can only exchange 40 notes per day, so 400 bullion per day. Once a week, you can exchange up to 6,000 caps for an extra 300 bullion. Treasury notes are common rewards for completing public events, and you can earn an unlimited number of them per day. So here's a bit of context. The Secret Service Armor Jetpack mod costs 2,000 gold bullion. If you're farming efficiently each day, it's going to take you 5 days of farming to get the bullion to buy it. But you also need the armor piece to put that mod onto, so that's actually 3,250, which is 8 days of farming, assuming you did the 6k cap buyout too. This is just for one armor piece and one mod. Granted, it's one of the more expensive items, but it's also one of the most popular ones. There's hundreds of items to buy with this stuff, so it's not unreasonable to say most players can spend a solid 2 or 3 months of daily efficient treasury note farming to get everything they want. And that's just gold bullion, which is the more straightforward currency. Legendary script and legendary cores are more convoluted, and that's because they are tied to slot machine mechanics. Like treasury notes, legendary cores are given as rewards for completing certain public events, and like them, there's no limit to how many you can earn each day. Legendary scrip is earned by breaking down legendary items in a legendary exchange machine. Scrip has a limit of 400 per day, and the amount of scrip you get depends on the number of stars on the items you are breaking down. Some clever folks might think, okay, I'm just going to do a ton of farming of legendary items and just log in each day, exchange my weapons, and log off to make my life easier. Remember though, you have a weight limit on your stash, and it's not very high either, especially if those legendary items you are holding weigh 40 plus pounds each. It also doesn't take many items to tap out your script for the day. You could easily do a couple of events and get enough legendary items to cover that day. Scrip and cores are used for rolling legendary items. You can head to the Rusty Pick and spend scrip to roll for random 1, 2, or 3-star legendary items. The problem is that the pool of items you'll be rolling for is huge. You're only able to specify armor, ranged weapons, or melee weapons. So if you want a 3-star Exo 1 power armor left leg, you have to roll against every piece of armor, powered or not, and hope you get the exact piece you want with the exact effects you want. Or say you just want a good auto rifle. You'll be rolling against all those pistols and shotguns you don't even have perks for. Fortunately, you can turn all the worthless legendaries you're gonna get over to the exchange machine, but remember the daily script limit. Cores allow you to roll legendary effects directly on an item of your choice at a weapon or armor workbench, greatly improving the odds of you getting something you actually want to use. You still have to spend script though, because you need legendary modules, which are bought using script from the same vendor who runs the casino. Thing to note is not all legendary items are considered equal. There's a pretty major discrepancy between the base stats of items depending upon where you get them from. The game never calls attention to this fact. As a result, it seems the player base doesn't even know this is a thing. Because Pat and I don't have access to console commands or even save slots to do proper testing, we've had to reverse engineer what's going on here in other ways, so just keep in mind our sample size is limited. There seems to be 2 types of legendary items: bog standard legendaries and what I've taken to calling premium legendaries. The standards will just sport the same base stats the item normally would at its item level. In the case of the lever rifles I was comparing, the premium legendary rifle I won in the casino was sporting an extra 13% base damage. Pat reported his irreplaceable double barrel was 20% better than the other double barrels he crafted himself. So, okay, we figured legendaries the player crafted themselves are nerfed compared to the ones won through RNG. Maybe it's a balanced consideration to give players a reason to mess with the most RNG methods of acquiring items. For some added context, the Fixer has been the meta for a while simply due to its 20% base damage increase compared to the standard auto combat rifles. 13 to 20% is a really big deal in this game. However, it seems nobody is aware this is a limitation placed on a weapon simply due to where it's sourced. Do you think the people on Reddit rolling thousands of legendaries would continue if they knew the item they were placing it on was 13 to 20% worse just because they crafted it? But the nerfing doesn't stop at crafted weapons. The vampire lever rifle we found on a random legendary dog out in the mire was also a standard legendary. I also compared a laser rifle I got as a reward for completing an event, and that too was a standard legendary. It seems premiums are very exclusive, tied almost entirely to the casino. The reason Pat got his from a drop during Collision Course was probably due to the Santas being programmed to drop premium legendaries because it was a timed holiday event. There's something really weird going on with legendaries that I don't think the community is fully aware of. Considering most discussions of legendaries I see are about how terrible the odds are for landing a good legendary, I think more players ought to be looking into this. For the sake of our sanity, I won't get into stamps. It's not complicated, it's just not worth getting into. As well, atoms are just the premium currency for buying items in the real-life money shop. There's no limits to it, and very modest amounts can be earned by completing daily challenges and making progress with the battle pass. We also have faction reputation from Wastelanders, which just unlocks more stuff to buy with bullion. Reputation can be increased by grinding 3 very repetitive daily quests and participating in Moonshine Jamboree and Eviction Notice. Fortunately, both of those are great events, so at least there's some mercy here. The daily grind looks something like this. Log on and check the Atomic Shop to claim any free items you might be given, then hop into a server and make note of what daily challenges are available. Harvest all the resources in your camp because you'll want all that stuff generating while you're playing. Go to the Overseer's house and talk to a robot assistant to get the daily to photograph something at either Foundation or Crater. What you pick here will affect who you will be getting reputation for. Go to one of those hubs, take the photos, and talk to the quest giver to start their daily. Go to the other settlement, sell those photos to said faction for reputation gain, and start their daily. Complete the objectives for both settlements as dailies, turn them in for more reputation with both factions, then return to the Overseer's robot to inform him you sold the photos. He'll still give you some treasury notes, so it's worth doing. All of this takes about 20 minutes. With reputation out of the way, it's time to start grinding events. Join any events that will give notes, cores, reputation, or legendary items. If they don't reward any of that, you might as well just ignore them. In the downtime between events, grind out the daily challenges and maybe work on weekly challenges if you haven't finished them yet. If you care about stamps, you can start doing that grind too. Once you have enough legendary items, go and exchange them and tap out the script limit for the day. Visit your camp and harvest everything that's generated while you've been playing, and head to a train station to sell all your excess food, water chems, and whatever else until you hit the cap limit for the day. Somewhere between all of this, you should hook up with some other players and knock out the daily ops. That's about 10 minutes. If you want, you can get a head start on tomorrow's grind by stockpiling some legendary items, but that's not really necessary. And that's it. You're done for the day. Odds are this routine will take at most 2 to 3 hours. If you want to keep playing, well, I don't really know what to tell you. You could keep doing public events, I guess, but sooner or later you're gonna have to start dropping legendary items because you'll be out of stash space. You could do some resource farming if you're low on something or need to make some ammo. Now that I mention it, I guess it's time we talk about ammo in this game. The ammo economy in 76 is really bizarre. In the early game, you're going to have so much ammo, you're going to be tempted to either sell it or stop picking it up because it will take up stash space if you don't have the Pay Piggy ammo box. But you can't sell it to NPC vendors, so your only options are to then stick it in your player shop or break it down at an ammo conversion machine. The ammo converter was a quality of life item added post-launch, but using it was one of the most needlessly tedious processes I came across in this game. You have to navigate the terminal interface to find the ammo type in your inventory you want to convert, turn it into ammo points using the interface's predefined quantities, then do the whole process again in reverse to convert the points into ammo. The quantities of the ammo listed are in stacks, not individual rounds. So if it says you're buying 1,000 units, you're buying 1,000 stacks of ammo, which is probably somewhere closer to 6,000 rounds. I have no idea why this wasn't just a vendor interface, seeing as we're converting this crap into a currency anyways. The best part is that in order to get the machine, you either have to hope it's being sold that week by the game's traveling vendor, or pay atoms for it in the Atomic Shop. Pat bit the bullet on this one, thinking it would have been useful, and we both ended up regretting his purchase. The reason you're going to be flush with ammo, at first, is because the game's loot system heavily weighs in favor of the ammo of your currently equipped weapon. So if you're like Pat, running around using the double barrel almost exclusively, you're going to be drowning in shells. The system doesn't take into account the ammo usage of the weapon either, so Pat would get the same amount of shells if he had a double barrel equipped or a pump action, even though the double barrel was way more ammo efficient. Naturally, the system is tuned so that even pump action users will likely run an ammo surplus. but sooner or later you'll likely pick up some weapons chambered for other ammo types, or you'll be using a weapon that eats a lot of ammo, like the heavy weapons. Then the reverse problem manifests, and you're going to be running an ammo deficit. I'd say this is how it should be in a survival game, but two things make this an annoying issue. First, if your build is only designed for one specific weapon, which is the best way to maximize your damage output, running out of ammo in the middle of an activity is going to be a big problem. Second, this doesn't really encourage diversifying your arsenal, because acquiring more ammo is actually pretty trivial. So all this achieves is forcing you to interrupt whatever you were doing to run home and craft more. Right out of Vault 76, you can make any ammo type you want at a tinker's workbench for pretty cheap. Lead is likely going to be the biggest bottleneck for you, but that's nothing a quick tour of every train station vendor on the map won't fix. I actually wound up making that a part of my daily grind. I'd pack a few extra bottles of water so I could recoup a portion of the caps I spent buying all the bulk lead from the vendors. This actually made me even more efficient with farming caps because I was storing a portion of my caps into stocks of lead. I started doing this with a lot of resources actually. It's not like it's going to take up stash space anyways. I like how RuneScape teaches kids how things like profit margins in the stock market works, while 76 teaches kids how hiding money in non-liquid assets can circumvent regulations and taxes. Okay, so you finished your grinds for the day, now you want to know when you can return to do it all again. Any other game, there's a fixed time of day where all the timers reset at once. Of course, 76 can't be that simple. Some things refresh at a specific time of the day, some things are based on timers. For instance, the vendors, legendary exchange machines, and the gold presses will reset 20 hours after your first transaction with them. Daily quests reset at 7 PM EST, while daily challenges reset at 12 PM EST. How are you supposed to know all of this? I guess check the subreddit. Just don't accept the first answer you see. Pat was way more regimented than I was when it came to the daily grind, so he was able to earn enough to buy himself a Secret Service jetpack and build the thing. I eventually got the plans to make them, but try as I might, I couldn't get lucky with getting the resources to make the jetpack mod because they were randomly dropped from a world event boss. Instead, I focused my energy on grinding levels to rebuild my class into the meta. This was an auto rifle build that stacked critical damage perks and perks to boost the frequency of my crits while using the Fixer. The Fixer is an auto rifle you get from completing a frankly very boring series of quests that unexpectedly ends with the ability to trigger the Sheep Squatch event. I also got a vampiric auto laser rifle that just melted enemies because of its passive fire damage upgrade. I also had perks that let me cripple enemy limbs easily, so half the time if I was fighting something it couldn't even reach me because a couple of taps from the Fixer would break their legs. I then threw some stealth elements into my build, which basically meant I became a stealth archer, stacking dumb amounts of critical stealth hits. The best part about stealth is that it seems to just disable enemy AI. So at any point in combat, I could just crouch and the enemies would immediately lose sight of me, allowing me to then stack stealth attacks. Needless to say, I pretty much broke the game with this build. It took a lot of screwing around and swallowing my pride and adopting the meta, but you know what? It just worked.
I thought it would be prudent to take our picture now that we're back here at Vault 76.
It really has come full circle, hasn't it? I wish this was the end, but unfortunately we have so much more left to do. I still kind of wish we'd have quit that night. Had we known we'd already seen most of the exciting stuff in 76, we might just have. We're going to cruise through the last 3 major content updates for 76. It seems fitting because while Wastelanders made some waves to catch people's attention, Steel Dawn, Steel Rain, and the Pitt expeditions barely made waves within the game's existing community. The problem with Steel Dawn Rain were that they were primarily single-player story-focused expansions, in a game whose most compelling parts were its most MMO-like. Where Wastelanders was an obvious pivot away from whatever the original game was going for, Dawn Rain were aimless follow-up acts that completely squandered any opportunity this game had to reassert its relevance in the gaming world. I really think 76 had the perfect opportunity to make a comeback. Since 2020, the AAA scene has been a barren wasteland of releases as games have been constantly delayed, and whatever has been released has often fallen completely flat. People were stuck inside with nothing to do and unable to see their friends and families. Bethesda would never again get a better environment to relaunch a welcoming casual online co-op game. There was even an opportunity to do the Mothership Zeta event right before Starfield's launch. But as I've pointed out already, there was never an overall vision for this game. Wastelanders was damage control, and with the bleeding actually stemmed now, now, it was time to start scaling back and getting this project into a comfortable profit-turning stage. This is likely why everything we've seen post-Wastelanders has been tied to some sort of iconic and memorable element from previous games. No more making major changes, it was time to start playing it safe. And that's the best way I can describe these DLCs. Safe and boring. So safe and so boring, in fact, that I have almost nothing to say about the BOS stuff because Pat covered it so thoroughly with what little he had to say about it. The most interesting element of these two DLCs were the absurd stories they tried to tell. As terrible as the execution was, Wastelanders was at least ambitious with how it was trying to tell two competing storylines with all sorts of dialogue choices. The BOS quests stripped a lot of that back, streamlining the experience into a very linear story where the player has barely any input on events, instead just being bossed around by two leaders whom the writers seem to want the player to dislike. What have we seen so far that can inspire people to want to check this game out? What elements make current players want to tell their friends to start playing it? This is a multiplayer game with busted co-op elements, almost no player economy, literally no official support for player communities, and hardly any player interaction outside of 10-minute public events. The reason people continue to play EVE Online is because they see the insane stories of large battles between clans where tens of thousands of real-life dollars gets blown up over the course of a weekend. People want to play classic World of Warcraft because they hear about the crap the degenerates in that game do because the mechanics of the game are designed to facilitate that behavior. What headlines come out of 76? A group of players put on a Shakespeare play? Cool, I'll love being one of the 6 audience members in there because we can only get 24 plus 8 people on a server. Bethesda overcorrected so hard that they turned 76 into a busted, watered-down parody of their worst single-player games. And because it's online, we can't even install mods to give it the longevity Skyrim has. At this point, if they want to make this game work, I think they need to, if not give players access to private server tools and full modding tools, then at least give us an offline mode where modders can start to make use of the cool map Bethesda originally built. Pat and I were at least able to do most of the Pitt together because these were just daily ops. In fact, playing co-op really worked in our favor because we were both able to get our own ultrasight battery, allowing us to play through both missions back to back the same day. I joined Pat on his mission and he joined me on mine, and it all worked perfectly fine. The Pitt was a visually impressive location, but we were taken aback by how linear these areas really were. We were expecting this to be another open world region like Appalachia, just Pitt flavored and higher leveled. What we got were big dungeons with some objectives like hunting down steel ingots and clearing out enemies in a yard or defending a church to act as some speed bumps. Not only that, these weren't even challenging dungeons because the loot tables for enemies were modified to just drop tons of ammo for our equipped guns and plenty of chems to keep us alive. It was probably the most autopilot I ever got with 76 until we hit the end and realized that was it. That's all 76 had left for us. We then retreated to Skyhaven Temple just to unpack what we had played. The game had ended on such a flat note that we couldn't walk away just yet. We used the camp building tools to build a set for an impromptu podcast where we just vented. Eventually, the game had enough and the server kicked us off for some scheduled maintenance. And that's where our journey with 76 ended. We did come back for an hour after our trip to West Virginia, so that we could do a quick tour to compare the game to what we saw in real life and share some laughs and memories until Pat's game crashed. There were a bunch of side quests we hadn't done, a few events here and there, grinds that would never be completed, but we saw everything we needed to see. In terms of sheer hours worth of content, 76 does deliver. If your only metric is total playtime you can suck out of a product irrespective of its quality, then 76 is a great value, so long as you don't start dropping cash on Fallout First in the Atomic Shop. If you have Xbox Game Pass, then it's practically free to play. We sunk over 150 hours into this game, rushing a lot of it, and we also left plenty of content on the table. I don't see how people make it past level 300 on a character, but I think it's fair to say the game has a solid 200 hours of content for new players. Eventually, though, you'll either be done with the game, or you'll find yourself in the position long-term players are finding themselves in right now where the game is clearly done with you. Its future is hard to say because Bethesda hasn't said anything. We aren't even sure if anyone at a Bethesda studio is working on this title right now. They brought in a contract studio back in March of 2022 in order to start assisting, and it seems the Nuka World on Tour mini update was a product of the small team at Double 11. Since then, it's just been tiny community updates for things like a new Battle Pass season and some holiday content, a lot of which is being recycled from previous years. We're well into April now, and there's still no new roadmap. The copium seems to be running out now, as players are starting to interpret the radio silence from the developers as a sign that things are not going well. Sure, they promised content well into 2027 back in March of 2022, but that was before Starfield got delayed by almost a full year, Microsoft and the greater tech sector started doing massive layoffs, and the Pitt expeditions completely bombed. The landscape has changed drastically this past year. It's likely all hands on deck with Starfield until the game is out, but I seriously doubt whatever resources were pulled from 76 will be coming back to it after work on Starfield is done. Xbox and Microsoft hosted a little developer update back in January, and while ESO got its own 10-minute feature to reveal the new Morrowind expansion, Fallout 76 didn't even get mentioned. It didn't even appear in a little trailer montage at the bookends of the event. And I think that's the biggest indicator of all that this game is getting put out to pasture. I doubt it's going to be shut down anytime soon, but I really can't imagine Bethesda and Microsoft justifying pumping any more serious development money into this failed experiment. It's clear Expeditions were meant to be a platform for future expansions, but in the end it flopped because nobody played it, and since its release there's been no official word on the future Expeditions they promised before the Pitt released. It's now just another promised future update that's going to be getting ignored when the community brings it up, just like 4- and 5-star legendaries, pets, and those improvements to camps. If you're still logging in each day, doing your daily grind, holding out hope that the next update, oh, that's going to be the one, I don't really know what else to say except go look at Halo Infinite right now. There's a game that had more money thrown behind it than 76 ever had, with a planned 10-year lifespan, and they just gutted that entire studio and are already talking about moving on to new projects. 76 is a Microsoft product now, and they are going to be running it like one. It's a shame because there was potential in this idea. I mean, I had my doubts it was going to work out with the direction Bethesda had been heading, and playing through it only proved I was right to avoid it all these years, but it's still a shame. As a result, 76 has likely killed any serious idea of a Fallout MMO being made anytime soon, and I don't know, maybe it's for the best. Thanks for watching. So this was a video I've wanted to do for a while. I actually did a 15-minute review of it back in 2021 when I was still experimenting on this channel, but I wound up pulling it down because I just didn't like the video. Ever since then, though, I vowed to go the distance when I returned to 76, and I can say I went the distance all right, all 1,500 miles of it. This project ended up turning into something I never really would have imagined. 76 is a very complicated game to explain because it was experimental, and so the history of its content becomes key to the discussion. When I started writing, I figured this could be either a 3-hour video or a 6+ hour video. I have enough already on my plate with Skyrim looming over me, so a 6-hour 76 video was out of the question, so I ended up settling on the 3-hour video. I also wanted to inject as many clips of our adventure into this as I could because this game just kept giving us more and more rope to hang it with. So with those clips, it's now a 4-hour video. I was also using this video as a test bed for future video ideas, specifically Morrowind, and eventually I want to cover more multiplayer games. So I was just trying to figure out how to balance a bunch of different things with this video. As a result, it ended up being actually very experimental for me, which is why it's taken so long to produce. I also didn't expect to end up in West Virginia and DC doing research on this game setting with Pat. So our plans for how we'd collaborate on this project ended up changing a lot until we pretty much realized we just had to divvy up the topics and do our own videos. The 76 turned out to be a rare opportunity for both of us, and while there's a lot I really wish I could have gotten to cover or just spent more time covering in general, this project was getting bloated way too quickly, and so like Bethesda and Microsoft, I gotta call it here. As always, thanks to my patrons, channel members, and just my viewers for being patient while I wrangled with this one. I know you're all waiting for the next Skyrim video, and it's still coming, trust me, I got tons of plans for it, but I might have to take a pit stop to do a very quick project on a game I actually enjoy. I feel like I might need a palate cleanser before I throw myself into the deep end with Skyrim. I don't know, we'll see. Anyways, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.
Dang.
map does not have the switchbacks on it. Nah, you're fine. It's just the map definitely didn't get the scale of what we had signed up for.
I'll have you know, this is the first time I've ever done an off-road trail. And,
oh, you got it easy then. They put down like the butane for you.
Yeah.
This is half asphalt. And they've widened it out anywhere that like is crumbling, so. Yeah, just if you feel like you're losing control, go towards the cliff, not off it. Alright, I see the bottom. It's still like a 50 meters or so.
Say going off-road and mean going to the beach.
Yeah.
I can't wait to tell my friend who goes off-roading. I'm just gonna send him this fucking footage.
Yeah, this is good.
I don't know if I did that.
No, he ran.
Great check on this bitch. Oh, there's the bridge up there.
Yeah, I was gonna say.